Hi guys, tonight we travel westward from the crowded heart of ancient China, following narrow roads that disappear into dust, mountain shadow, and rumour. You move through the waking streets of Chang'an before dawn, while lanterns still tremble softly in the cool air, and stable boys led coughing camels through the city gates. Somewhere nearby, a bronze bell rings once. The sound fades into morning mist. The city is already alive. You smell damp earth from yesterday's rain mixed with horse sweat, smoke, and steaming millet porridge sold by weary vendors who barely look awake themselves. Officials wrapped in layered silk hurry toward government compounds, while labourers haul crates onto carts with stiff shoulders and quiet resentment. The Han Empire stretches enormous around you, but here, in these half-lit streets, it feels strangely human, fragile even. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in tonight, perhaps share your location, your local time, and what part of history you enjoy most. It is always comforting to imagine distant listeners sitting awake together beneath different skies. Now, dim the lights. You stand beside the western gate of Chang'an as sunrise slowly brushes the tiled rooftops gold. Beyond these walls lies the beginning of something vast. The Silk Road does not exist yet as a single road. Not really. It is still only a patchwork of dangerous trails, local bargains, military ambitions, and desperate guesses stretching into lands most people here will never see. Yet already, the Empire feels the pull of the West. Inside the Han court, maps are unrolled across lacquered tables by candlelight. Officials debate reports brought back by exhausted envoys who speak of mountain kingdoms, fierce horsemen, and rich markets hidden beyond deserts that seem almost mythological. Some accounts contradict one another. Distances change depending on the storyteller. Entire rivers appear and disappear between versions. Still, one detail returns again and again. The horses! Tall, powerful animals from Fergana, far beyond the western frontier, said to sweat blood and outrun anything bred within Han territory. The Emperor wants them badly, not for vanity alone. The Xiongnu nomads continue threatening the northern borders, moving swiftly across the grasslands with terrifying efficiency. The Empire needs stronger cavalry. Faster horses may mean survival, and so trade, diplomacy, espionage, and conquest slowly begin blending together into something larger than anyone fully understands. A camel groans beside you. The sound is unpleasant enough to feel strangely memorable. You watch a handler tighten leather straps across wooden crates, packed with silk bolts wrapped carefully against dust. Silk is already precious here, though those producing it rarely experience luxury themselves. In villages across China, families wake before dawn to tend silkworms feeding endlessly on mulberry leaves. The work is delicate and exhausting. Children help gather leaves. Women unwind fragile threads with aching fingers over bowls of hot water. A single damaged cocoon can ruin hours of labour. And yet these shimmering fabrics will travel farther than the people who make them could ever imagine. You follow the caravan outside the city walls as the morning grows brighter. Wheels creak over packed dirt roads. Camels snort clouds into the cold air. One merchant mutters anxiously about bandits while another checks his inventory for the third time in an hour. Their fears are justified. The western roads are dangerous in ways difficult to predict. Some dangers carry swords, others carry thirst. The landscape changes slowly as you leave the fertile heartland behind. Villages become less frequent. The roads roughen. Wind pushes loose dust against your robes. By midday, you pass soldiers stationed at a frontier outpost where watchtowers rise above the plain like weathered teeth. The guards look tired already. Most are young men sent far from home by imperial orders they barely understand. Their armour smells faintly of old leather and rain. Some joke loudly to hide nervousness while others stare silently toward the horizon. One soldier carries a letter from his wife tucked carefully inside his sleeve. He has reread it so many times the edges have softened like cloth. You begin noticing how often the Silk Road depends on ordinary loneliness. Not grand strategy, not emperors alone. Homesick guards, underpaid translators, caravan cooks, stable boys, widows selling supplies near remote forts. History often moves because exhausted people continue walking anyway. As evening approaches, the caravan stops beside a small military settlement built from packed earth walls. Smoke rises from cooking fires into fading orange light. A tired official records names onto bamboo slips while merchants argue over taxes. Nobody enjoys the conversation. The official looks as exhausted as the traders. Dinner is simple: flat bread, dried meat, thin soup with scallions floating near the surface. You sit beside strangers listening to fragments of many conversations drifting through smoke-darkened air. A trader from the western regions describes markets where jade is weighed against gold. Another claims he once saw blue-eyed musicians performing for nobles in a distant court. Someone laughs skeptically. Accounts grow taller after dark. Still, curiosity spreads around the fire. The Han dynasty stands confident in its power, yet deeply uncertain about the world beyond its borders. Officially, China often regards itself as the civilized center of existence. Foreign peoples are categorized carefully, sometimes dismissively, yet trade is a way of softening certainty. Every caravan returns carrying unfamiliar objects, new words, strange beliefs, and unsettling evidence that other civilizations possess sophistication of their own. The empire expands materially first. Emotionally, expansion takes longer. Night settles cold across the frontier settlement. Somewhere beyond the walls, horses shift restlessly in their sleep. You hear distant wind rubbing against dry grass. A guard coughs twice from a nearby tower. Then silence stretches comfortably around the camp. You look westward. Nothing visible yet suggests the enormous human network that will eventually connect China to Central Asia, Persia, India, the Mediterranean, and beyond. No single traveller will ever journey the entire route from end to end regularly. Goods will pass hand to hand across generations, languages, and empires. Stories will mutate as they travel. Religions will move quietly beside spices and textiles. Paper, gunpowder, Buddhism, glassware, music, astronomy, plague, everything travels eventually. But tonight, standing near the edge of Han territory, the future still feels uncertain. Fragile trails disappear into darkness beyond the firelight. Men whisper calculations about water supplies and distances between wells. Camels kneel awkwardly beside stacked cargo. A young soldier quietly cries when nobody can see him clearly. History rarely announces itself while it is happening. Usually it sounds like wagons creaking through cold night air. The fire burns lower. Somewhere in the darkness ahead lies the Hexi Corridor, the deserts beyond Dunhuang, the mountain kingdoms of Central Asia, and cities whose names will survive long after their walls collapse into sand. But for now, you remain here at the Empire's breathing edge, listening to tired merchants settle beneath rough blankets, while frontier winds move softly across the earth. And slowly, almost without noticing, the road west begins carrying you with it. Morning arrives, pale and cold, across the frontier settlement. Frost clings lightly to wagon wheels, and the camels complain before they even stand. Their long groans drift through the grey dawn like ancient machinery refusing another day of labour. Nearby, a cook stirs millet porridge inside a blackened pot, while sleepy soldiers warm stiff hands over smoking coals. Nobody moves quickly out here. The road west punishes haste. You leave the outpost beside a caravan leader named Ren, a narrow-faced man with windburned skin and a habit of checking the horizon every few minutes. He trusts almost nobody completely, which perhaps explains why he has survived this long. One of his ears is partially missing from an old fight near the desert routes beyond Dunhuang. He never tells the full story. Ren walks beside the camels rather than riding them. Animals respect suffering, he says quietly after noticing your curiosity. Too much comfort confuses them. It sounds ridiculous at first. Then you watch the caravan continue steadily for hours while wealthier merchants sway miserably atop exhausted horses. The land opens wider as you travel northwest through the Hexi Corridor, the long narrow stretch of territory pressed between mountains and desert. It is one of the most important passages in the ancient world, though at times it barely resembles a road at all. To the south rise the dark ridges of the Kilian Mountains, sharp with snow even from a distance. To the north spreads dry emptiness where dust storms wander without warning. Everything moving west must pass through here. Silk, jade, horses, religion, rumour, grief. The Han Empire understands the corridor's importance clearly. Fortified watchtowers appear at intervals along the route, rising from the earth in lonely silence. Signal fires can carry warnings rapidly across vast distances when danger approaches. At least in theory. In practice, messages sometimes arrive late, or not at all. You stop near midday beside one of the towers where soldiers inspect travel permits written carefully on bamboo strips. The officer overseeing inspections looks exhausted beyond words. Purple shadows hang beneath his eyes. He cannot be older than 30. Still, he examines every document meticulously. The Empire fears infiltration constantly. Xiongnu raiders move unpredictably across the frontier regions, attacking settlements, stealing supplies, sometimes disappearing before larger forces arrive. Entire villages occasionally vanish into smoke and silence. The soldiers stationed here live with permanent uncertainty. One young guard asks quietly whether Chang'an truly smells as wonderful as people claim. Another wants to know if the Emperor ever walks freely through the markets disguised as an ordinary citizen. Apparently rumours about this circulate endlessly across remote military posts. The fantasy comforts people somehow. It suggests rulers might secretly witness ordinary hardship. No evidence supports the stories. Still, the guards repeat them. You continue west through landscapes that seem almost unfinished. Dry grass bends beneath restless wind. Thin rivers flash briefly beneath sunlight before vanishing again into stone and dust. Sometimes hours pass without conversation. Human beings become quieter in enormous spaces, yet trade continues relentlessly. A smaller eastbound caravan passes during late afternoon carrying raw jade from Khotan, wrapped carefully in wool. The merchants wear layered clothing patched repeatedly at elbows and knees. One old trader carries a tiny wooden flute tucked into his belt. During a rest stop, he plays softly while the animals drink. The melody feels lonely enough to silence everyone nearby. Music travels strangely along the Silk Road. Songs absorb fragments from distant cultures without announcement. Rhythms shift. Instruments change shape. Lyrics disappear between languages. A tune heard beside a Chinese frontier fort may carry echoes from valleys thousands of miles away. Nobody notices history blending while it happens. The road teaches this lesson repeatedly. That evening, the caravan shelters beside a cluster of mulberry trees near a farming settlement. Compared to the harsh openness surrounding it, the village feels improbably gentle. Children chase one another between irrigation channels while chickens scatter noisily across packed dirt yards. Smoke rises sweetly from cooking fires scented faintly with garlic and onion. And here, quietly, you meet the beginning of Silk itself, inside a small farmhouse. An elderly woman named Lin tends trays of silkworms resting upon woven mats. The room feels warm and humid compared to the cool evening outside. Thousands of pale caterpillars feed steadily on mulberry leaves with tiny clicking sounds, almost like light rain. The noise is strangely hypnotic. Lin moves carefully among them with practiced patience. Her fingers bear small scars from years of work. Silk production demands precision at every stage. The worms must remain protected from sudden temperature changes, loud disturbances, even certain cooking smells. Entire harvests can fail unexpectedly. Yet the knowledge passes quietly through generations. Many legends surround the discovery of silk. One story claims an empress first noticed a cocoon unravelling into delicate thread after it fell into hot tea centuries earlier. Historians debate the truth. No clear answer survives. But by the Han Dynasty, silk production has already become one of China's most carefully guarded secrets. Foreigners desire silk desperately. The empire intends to keep control over its creation. Lin shows you bowls where cocoons soak in steaming water before workers unwind single threads with astonishing care. The strands appear impossibly fine between her fingers. You realise suddenly how much labour hides inside every bolt of finished fabric travelling westward. A Roman noblewoman wearing silk in some distant future city will never imagine this quiet farmhouse, or the smell of damp mulberry leaves, or the aching backs of workers bending over steaming bowls long before sunrise. Outside, darkness settles slowly across the settlement. The caravan animals rest beside low fences while merchants gather for dinner beneath hanging lanterns. Someone roasts strips of lamb over open flame. Grease crackles softly into the fire. A translator from the western regions tells stories about cities where many languages fill the same market square. You can buy spices beside Buddhist scrolls, he says, then hear Greek songs before sunset. Some listeners laugh skeptically. Others lean closer. The Silk Road expands first through imagination. Long before most people travel these routes themselves, they begin picturing distant places in increasingly vivid detail. Curiosity becomes difficult to contain once trade begins carrying physical proof of foreign worlds back home. Glass bowls unlike anything made in China, Persian silverwork, Indian spices, tall horses, blue-eyed musicians, strange religions. Human beings have always been vulnerable to wonder. Late into the evening, Ren sits sharpening a knife beside the fading firelight. Sparks drift upward into darkness. He watches them silently for a while before speaking. Most people think merchants love wealth most. He says, "Usually we love movement." The sentence lingers with you. Perhaps he's right. The Silk Road survives because certain people cannot resist the pull of horizons. Not emperors alone, not armies, but restless individuals willing to endure discomfort, danger, and endless uncertainty simply to see what waits beyond the next mountain pass. Tomorrow the caravan will continue deeper into the corridor toward harsher country. The roads will narrow, water will become precious. The Empire's grip will feel thinner with every mile. But tonight, beside warm lantern light and the endless soft clicking of silkworms feeding in the dark, the western journey still carries traces of home. The caravan leaves the farming settlement before sunrise, while frost still silvers the edges of the irrigation channels, and the mulberry trees stand motionless in pale blue darkness. You hear sleepy voices, harness chains, and the soft, irritated breathing of camels rising into cold air. One animal refuses to stand at all. 3 men argue with it for nearly 10 minutes before finally bribing the creature upright with dried dates. Nobody celebrates the victory. The camel looks personally offended by existence itself. Ren only shakes his head. "Best attitude for survival," he mutters. The road west narrows gradually as the Hexi corridor tightens between mountain and desert. To the south, snow remains fixed upon distant peaks like white paint across dark stone. To the north, the land stretches outward into dry emptiness that seems capable of swallowing sound itself. Wind moves constantly here, sometimes softly, sometimes with sudden violence. You begin tasting dust even while drinking water. The Han Empire has spent enormous effort securing this corridor. Garrisons, beacon towers, supply depots, and fortified settlements now punctuate the route westward. Without them, long-distance trade would collapse almost immediately. Caravans need protection, reliable water, and places to rest animals before continuing into harsher terrain. Empires rarely expand through glory alone. Usually they expand through logistics. By midday, you arrive at a larger frontier fort built from rammed earth walls thick enough to resist both weather and attack. Soldiers move across the battlements carrying bows and bundles of firewood. Laundry hangs beside stacked spears. The ordinary details feel strangely comforting. A young officer named Wei oversees the garrison here. He greets the caravan politely but cautiously, his hand resting near the hilt of his sword almost unconsciously. Years on the frontier reshape people. Every stranger might carry danger concealed beneath friendly conversation. Still, Wei invites Ren to share tea inside the command quarters. You follow them into a low room smelling faintly of candle smoke. Old paper and damp wool cloaks drying near a brazier. Bamboo maps hang from the walls, marked carefully with rivers, wells, and known Xiongnu movements. Some information has already been crossed out and rewritten. The frontier changes constantly. Wei pours tea slowly into rough ceramic cups. He looks older than he first appeared outside. Fatigue settles around his eyes like permanent weather. How far west this time, he asks. Dunhuang first, Ren replies. Maybe farther if heaven remains generous. Wei snorts softly at that. Heaven has poor discipline. The men share tired laughter. Outside the fort walls, labourers unload grain shipments while blacksmiths repair damaged wagon fittings. A boy no older than 12 carries buckets of water between stables with visible determination. Though the buckets appear almost too heavy for him, frontier settlements depend upon everyone working beyond exhaustion. There is little room for softness here, yet human tenderness survives anyway. Near the animal pens, you notice an older soldier carefully brushing frost from a horse's mane while speaking to it under his breath. The horse nudges his shoulder gently. Nobody comments on the scene. Men stationed far from home often become emotionally attached to animals with surprising intensity. The horses listen without judgment. That afternoon, a dust storm appears suddenly from the northern plain. At first it resembles distant smoke. Then the wind sharpens. Guards begin shouting instructions across the fort while merchants rush to secure cargo beneath leather coverings. Camels groan anxiously. Sand lifts into the air in twisting brown sheets. Within minutes the world narrows. Dust fills your mouth, ears, sleeves, eyes. Breathing becomes difficult. The storm pounds against the fort walls with astonishing force while everyone shelters indoors beneath dim lantern light. Fine sand slips through cracks anyway, settling over tables and blankets in thin golden layers. Somewhere outside, an animal screams briefly in panic, and then comes the waiting. Dust storms can last hours, sometimes longer. Inside the crowded shelter room, strangers sit shoulder to shoulder while the wind roars beyond the walls like distant surf. A merchant from Shu complains endlessly about ruined inventory until another traveller threatens to throw him outside personally. Nobody doubts he means it. Eventually silence returns. Not peaceful silence, exhausted silence. A woman travelling with a caravan unwraps small cakes filled with dates and passes them quietly around the room. The gesture changes the atmosphere almost immediately. Hunger softens people into gratitude. You think about how often survival depends upon tiny acts of generosity history never records. As evening approaches, the storm weakens enough for people to emerge cautiously outside. The landscape has transformed completely. Sand drifts against walls and wagon wheels. Footprints vanish almost instantly beneath fresh layers of dust. The air smells dry enough to crack stone, yet the sunset arrives beautifully. Red light spreads across the corridor while snow peaks burn faintly pink above the darkening earth. For several moments, everyone simply watches in silence. Even the most hardened soldiers pause their work. Beauty still reaches people here, perhaps more sharply because life feels uncertain. That night, Wei joins the caravan fire carrying a jug of fermented mare's milk traded from steppe nomads months earlier. The flavour is sour enough to surprise nearly everyone drinking it. Ren claims it tastes like angry yogurt left in the sun. Again, tired laughter spreads through the camp. Conversation drifts toward the Xiongnu Confederation controlling much of the northern grasslands beyond Han authority. The Empire officially portrays them as dangerous barbarians, yet the reality remains more complicated. Some groups raid settlements violently, others trade peacefully. Alliances shift constantly across the frontier, where he speaks carefully while staring into the fire. Most men out here eventually stop believing simple stories, he says. Nobody responds immediately. The flames crackle softly between them. Empires prefer clean categories. Civilized and barbarian. Loyal and hostile. Chinese and foreign. But trade routes blur boundaries faster than governments can maintain them. Frontier soldiers marry local women. Translators speak multiple languages imperfectly woven together. Merchants adopt customs from distant lands because profit rewards flexibility. Identity becomes fluid along the Silk Road. Not always comfortably. Later. After most travellers settle beneath blankets, you walk briefly beyond the fort walls. The night air feels brutally cold after the crowded warmth inside. Above you, the stars appear overwhelming in number. No city lights soften them here. The sky stretches sharp and endless across the corridor. Somewhere far west lies Dunhuang. Beyond that, deserts large enough to bury entire kingdoms. And farther still, worlds the Han court barely comprehends. Yet tonight, standing beside a lonely frontier fort with sand still whispering across the ground after the storm. The road continues pulling steadily outward, one watchtower at a time, one weary caravan at a time, one fragile human connection after another. Several days later, the mountains begin drawing closer. The Hexi corridor narrows into a harsher world of stone ridges, dry riverbeds, and bitter winds that seem to arrive from nowhere. The caravan moves more slowly now. Wheels crack more often on uneven ground. Animals tire faster. Even conversation feels heavier. You notice how silence changes between travellers over time. At the beginning of the journey, silence feels cautious. Now it feels shared. The road west has already become a kind of private language between people who wait cold, eat quickly, and measure distance by wells rather than milestones. Everyone watches the horizon differently now, more carefully, less romantically. Ren rides part of the morning beside a young groom named Tao, who cannot stop asking questions about Fergana and its famous horses. Tao has never seen one himself. Few people here have. Still, stories travel faster than caravans. The heavenly horses of Fergana have already entered the imagination of the Han Empire. According to travellers returning from Central Asia, these animals are taller, stronger, and vastly more enduring than Chinese breeds. Some accounts claim they sweat blood during battle. Others insist they descend from divine stock. Historians later suspect the blood came from skin parasites staining the animals' coats red. But legends rarely care about biology. What matters is desire. The Emperor wants these horses badly enough to reshape foreign policy around them. Military campaigns, diplomatic missions, and dangerous Western expeditions now revolve partly around securing reliable access to Central Asian cavalry stock. The frontier roads are no longer merely trade routes. They're arteries of imperial ambition, and ambition travels hungry. By afternoon, the caravan reaches a relay station crowded with soldiers escorting several magnificent horses eastward under heavy guard. The entire compound seems electrified by their presence. Stable boys whisper excitedly while merchants pretend not to stare. The animals truly are extraordinary. Broad chests, powerful necks, muscles shifting beneath glossy skin like water moving under silk. One tosses its head impatiently, breathing steam into the cold air. Even Ren looks impressed despite himself. They move like they know people envy them, he says. The officer commanding the escort introduces himself as Captain Zhao, a veteran cavalryman whose left hand bends stiffly from an old injury. He speaks proudly about the horses while supervising every detail personally. "These are worth more than gold," he says quietly. Gold cannot chase nomads across the grasslands. You walk beside the animal pens while soldiers brush the horses carefully before evening feeding. Their discipline borders on reverence. One groom wipes dust from a saddle with more attention than many men show their own clothing. The Empire understands symbolism. Possessing these horses means more than military strength. It signals reach, influence, the ability to pull distant wonders into the orbit of Han power. Yet the process has not been peaceful. Diplomatic missions westward often encounter suspicion, extortion, imprisonment, even murder. Some kingdoms welcome Chinese trade, others fear absorption. The Silk Road grows through negotiation as much as force. That evening, Zhao shares wine beside the caravan fire while describing earlier expeditions into Central Asia. His voice remains calm, though certain memories visibly darken his expression. "You can cross a mountain pass expecting trade," he says, then find 20 dead men frozen beside the road. Nobody interrupts. The fire crackles softly while cold wind brushes across the camp. Accounts of Western journeys during the Han Dynasty often describe extremes difficult to imagine comfortably. Burning deserts, snowstorms in narrow passes, wells poisoned during conflict, caravans disappearing without explanation. Yet despite these dangers, movement continues, because profit continues, because curiosity continues, because empires continue demanding more than their borders provide. Later in the evening, musicians arrive unexpectedly with another caravan travelling east. 2 men carry lutes with long curved necks, unlike instruments commonly seen in China. A woman travelling beside them wears silver jewellery that catches firelight whenever she turns her head. Without ceremony, they begin playing. The melody sounds unfamiliar at first, then gradually hypnotic. Different scales, different rhythms, something Western woven through it. The music alters the atmosphere immediately. Soldiers loosen visibly. Merchants stop counting inventory for once. Even exhausted animals seem calmer listening beside the firelight. Tao whispers, "Where did the song come from?" Nobody knows exactly. Perhaps Sogdiana, perhaps farther west. Songs lose passports quickly. You watch strangers from different regions sharing wine beneath cold stars, while foreign music drifts across the frontier station. The Silk Road is still young, yet already cultures are touching one another in subtle, irreversible ways. Not through declarations or treaties alone, but through sound, clothing, recipes, gestures, stories. Human intimacy often arrives disguised as commerce. Near midnight, you walk briefly through the relay station while most travellers sleep. Horses shift inside the stables with soft thuds and restless breathing. Lanterns flicker against wooden beams darkened by smoke and years of use. Somewhere nearby, a man coughs heavily in his sleep. The world beyond the station walls feels immense and unknowable, but inside life narrows into ordinary details. Wet leather drying near a fire, a cracked bowl repaired with wire, mud stiffening on boots beside a doorway. History survives through objects as much as monuments. The next morning begins before sunrise once again. Frost covers the horse pens. Captain Zhao's escort prepares carefully for departure eastward toward the Imperial Heartland. Stable boys move with nervous energy around the prized animals. One horse suddenly rears, nearly throwing its handler aside. For a moment, chaos erupts. Then stillness returns almost instantly as the animal settles beneath firm control. Zhao strokes the horse's neck afterward with surprising gentleness. "You cannot command fear away," he murmurs to the groom. "Only teach it where to stand." The sentence lingers long after the escort disappears eastward into morning haze. Soon your own caravan resumes the western journey toward Dunhuang. the final great outpost before the true deserts begin. Travellers speak the city's name with mixed anticipation and dread. Beyond it waits the Taklamakan Basin, where entire settlements vanish beneath sand over generations. The roads ahead will grow lonelier, water more precious, mistakes more expensive. Yet as the caravan moves onward beneath pale morning light, you sense something shifting emotionally among the travellers. The frontier no longer feels temporary. Home now exists somewhere behind you, blurred by distance and dust. Ahead lies uncertainty, and strangely, that uncertainty has begun feeling magnetic. Dunhuang appears slowly. At first you mistake the distant walls for another ridge of earth rising from the desert plain. Then sunlight catches watchtowers above the haze, and movement emerges along the roads leading inward. Carts, camels, thin columns of smoke, human noise carried faintly across dry air. After weeks along the corridor, the sight feels almost emotional. The caravan senses it too. Even the animals seem to quicken slightly as the final great outpost of Han China grows nearer. Dunhuang stands at the edge of worlds, beyond this place. The Silk Road fractures around the deadly Taklamakan Desert into northern and southern routes stretching toward oasis kingdoms, mountain passes, and distant civilizations. Everything west becomes more uncertain from here, which perhaps explains why Dunhuang feels so alive. The gates are crowded by midday. Soldiers inspect travellers while tax officials record cargo with practiced boredom. Traders from many regions move through the streets speaking languages you cannot identify. Some wear Chinese robes, others dress in wool, leather, or layered garments stitched with foreign patterns. You notice eyes of many different colours: dark brown, grey, green. A child pauses beside a water cellar to stare openly at a camel before being pulled away by his embarrassed mother. Nearby, two monks argue quietly over the correct translation of a Buddhist text while a merchant attempts to sell them dried apricots. The city smells of dust, lamp oil, sweat, horse dung, cumin, and smoke from cooking fires drifting upward between narrow streets. Compared to Chang'an, Dunhuang feels rougher, more improvised, but perhaps more honest too. Nobody here forgets the desert waiting outside the walls. You follow Ren toward a crowded inn where caravans gather before choosing their routes around the Taklamakan. The courtyard overflows with animals, cargo, and exhausted travellers trying unsuccessfully to rest. Somewhere overhead, laundry snaps sharply in desert wind. Inside, the innkeeper records names onto wooden tablets without looking particularly interested in anyone's survival. A fair approach, probably. Many travellers passing through Dunhuang never return. That evening, you walk through the market district while sunset stains the western sky copper red. Oil lamps flicker awake one by one beneath hanging awnings. Music drifts faintly from a nearby winehouse. Traders bargain over spices, furs, jade, and silk with weary determination. The Silk Road rarely sleeps completely. A Sogdian merchant displays glassware so clear and delicate that several local buyers simply stare in disbelief. Chinese craftsmen produce remarkable ceramics and lacquerware. But fine Western glass still feels almost magical here. Beside him, another trader sells carpets woven with geometric patterns unlike anything commonly seen in Han territory. Every object carries geography inside it, and memory. You stop near a stall where an elderly Buddhist monk copies texts carefully onto paper beneath lantern light. His fingers move slowly but steadily despite visible age. Around him rests a collection of manuscripts carried from farther west through oasis kingdoms and mountain monasteries. Buddhism is still relatively new in China during this period. Many people barely understand it. Some officials distrust foreign religions entirely. Yet the ideas continue travelling eastward along the same roads carrying silk and horses. Trade routes move beliefs as naturally as merchandise. The monk introduces himself as Dharmaraksha, though he laughs softly while admitting most locals shorten the name badly. He speaks several languages imperfectly layered together from decades spent travelling between cultures. Translation changes the mind, he says quietly while setting aside his brush. A thought enters one language and leaves another slightly transformed. You ask whether that troubles him. Everything transforms, he replies. Outside, night settles gradually over Dunhuang. Wind pushes sand softly through the streets while lanterns glow warm against dark adobe walls. You follow the monk beyond the market district toward the cliffs, south of the city where caves have begun filling with painted Buddhist imagery. The cave temples remain modest compared to what they will later become. Yet already they carry an atmosphere unlike anywhere else on the frontier. Inside one chamber, butter lamps flicker beneath painted walls showing distant paradises, wandering monks, and serene figures seated beneath trees. The air smells faintly of smoke, dust, and mineral pigments. Silence settles differently here, more inward. Travellers kneel quietly beside the walls, after months crossing brutal terrain where survival consumes nearly every waking thought. You begin understanding why religion spreads effectively along dangerous roads. Hardship creates spiritual hunger. A caravan guard sits nearby rubbing scarred hands together slowly while staring at a painted bodhisattva. Perhaps he seeks comfort. Perhaps only rest. The monk speaks softly in the dim light. Merchants carry teachings farther than armies, he says. Armies force obedience. Trade invites curiosity. The observation feels true. Outside the caves, the desert night turns colder rapidly. Stars emerge sharp above the cliffs while distant dogs bark somewhere within the city walls. You and the monk walk back toward Dunhuang, listening to sand whisper across the ground. He tells you about pilgrims travelling westward toward India in search of sacred texts and holy sites connected to the Buddha's life. Some survive the journey. Some vanish. Records grow uncertain. Still they continue going. Human beings will risk astonishing suffering searching for meaning. Back at the inn, the atmosphere has grown louder. Merchants drink heavily before the desert crossing ahead while musicians perform near the courtyard fire. One man boasts confidently about knowing secret wells across the southern route. Another quietly mentions seeing frozen bodies near a mountain pass years earlier. Nobody asks for details. The musicians play flutes and stringed instruments, while travellers from different worlds sit shoulder to shoulder sharing wine. Exhaustion and temporary companionship. A woman from Khotan sings softly, in a language most listeners do not understand. Yet everyone listens carefully anyway. Emotion crosses borders more easily than speech. Late into the night, Ren studies route maps beside a lantern inside the inn's storage room. Thin shadows move across his face while he calculates distances between oasis settlements. North route or south Tao asks nervously. Ren exhales slowly. Both paths around the Taklamakan carry risks. The northern route offers more frequent settlements but harsher political tensions between oasis kingdoms. The southern route provides longer isolated stretches where water becomes terrifyingly uncertain. The desert chooses eventually, Ren says. Not exactly comforting. Before sleeping, you climb briefly onto the inn rooftop overlooking Dunhuang beneath moonlight. From here, the city appears fragile against the surrounding dark emptiness. Beyond the walls stretches the beginning of the true Silk Road deserts, where shifting sands swallow roads, memories and entire generations, and yet lanterns still glow warmly below. People still laugh beside fires. Monks still copy sacred words carefully by hand. Tomorrow caravans will leave the safety of Dunhuang and scatter around the Taklamakan toward distant worlds, connected only by fragile threads of trust and endurance. Tonight, though, the city breathes quietly beneath the stars, holding back the desert one more evening. The caravan leaves Dunhuang beneath a sky the colour of cold iron. Nobody speaks much during departure. Even the usually restless merchants seem subdued while the city gates fade slowly behind you. Travellers understand what lies ahead now. Beyond the last cultivated fields begins the long edge of the Taklamakan Desert, one of the most feared landscapes in the ancient world. Some later travellers will translate its name loosely as you go in and do not come out. Whether the phrase is historically exact hardly matters. The feeling certainly is. Wren chooses the northern route after 3 nights of arguments, calculations, and increasingly sour discussions with rival caravan leaders. The decision pleases nobody entirely, which perhaps means it is sensible. Every path around the Taklamakan demands compromise between danger, politics, weather, and luck. Mostly luck. The land changes quickly once Dunhuang disappears behind you. Vegetation thins into brittle patches clinging desperately near dry stream beds. The wind carries sharper sand now, stinging exposed skin during stronger gusts. Far ahead, distant mountains rise blue-grey beneath the morning haze. The caravan stretches long across the empty plain. Camels first, then supply carts, then mounted guards watching constantly for trouble. Water already dominates every conversation. How much remains? Where the next well lies? Which oasis settlements can still be trusted after recent disputes? A merchant from Kucha claims one northern kingdom has doubled caravan taxes. Another traveller insists bandits now operate near certain passes disguised as local militia. No clear agreement survives. The Silk Road depends upon information, yet reliable information remains painfully rare. By midday, heat radiates upward from the earth despite the cool season. Dust settles inside clothing, food, hair, blankets. You begin understanding why travellers along these routes become obsessed with maintenance. Leather cracks, wheels split, water skins leak, tiny failures grow deadly very quickly. Tao spends nearly an hour repairing a damaged harness strap with concentrated desperation. Imagine dying because of stitching, he mutters. The frightening part is that he is correct. That evening, the caravan reaches a small oasis settlement clustered around narrow irrigation channels fed by mountain runoff. Mud brick homes press close together against the wind while thin poplar trees tremble beside the water. Children stop playing to watch the newcomers arrive. The settlement survives because of water alone. Without the oasis, this place would become silence and sand within months. A local innkeeper named Yulduz rents sleeping space inside a crowded communal room where travellers spread blankets shoulder to shoulder across woven mats. Her face carries the permanent expression of someone who has negotiated with difficult merchants for decades, which she has. You pay before sleeping, she says calmly. Dead travellers rarely settle debts. Again, not comforting. Dinner consists of hand-pulled noodles, onions, and strips of lamb cooked in heavy iron pots blackened by years of smoke. The smell alone lifts morale noticeably across the room. Nearby, a trader from farther west unwraps figs and walnuts from cloth bundles, instantly attracting attention from hungry travellers. Food becomes emotional in harsh landscapes. People remember kindness through meals. After eating, you step outside into cool evening air where the oasis murmurs quietly beneath the darkening sky. Water moves gently through narrow channels lined with stones, polished smooth by generations of hands and weather. Somewhere nearby, someone plays a flute badly but enthusiastically. The sound feels comforting anyway. Near the edge of the settlement, you meet an older woman tending a small shrine illuminated by oil lamps protected from the wind behind clay screens. The shrine blends symbols from several traditions together. Chinese protective charms hang beside local desert spirits carved into wood. A small Buddhist figure rests near bowls of dried herbs. You ask which god the shrine belongs to. The woman smiles faintly. All of them, if possible. The Silk Road creates spiritual mixtures as naturally as cultural ones. Along these routes, survival encourages flexibility. Travellers pray to unfamiliar gods before dangerous crossings. Local traditions absorb foreign influences slowly over generations. Pure boundaries rarely last long in caravan towns. The desert discourages certainty. That night, strong winds arrive after midnight. You wake to walls creaking softly while sand rasps against the building exterior like rough fabric dragged across stone. Several travellers sit awake already, listening uneasily. One camel outside screams in panic before handlers calm it. The sound lingers unpleasantly in the darkness. Beside you, Tal whispers that his older brother vanished years earlier during a crossing farther south. No body returned. No surviving witness knew exactly what happened. Maybe bandits, he says quietly, or maybe thirst. Then, after a pause, maybe just bad direction. The simplest explanation often frightens people most. Morning arrives through pale, dust-filled light filtering into the room. Travellers emerge stiff, gritty and irritable while the wind continues pushing fine sand across the oasis streets. Several camels escaped their tether points overnight and require nearly an hour to recover. Ren grows visibly tense. Storm conditions make navigation difficult beyond established markers. Entire caravans have wandered off course before, chasing mirages or mistaking dry valleys for proper routes. The Taklamakan does not always kill dramatically. Sometimes it simply confuses people until exhaustion finishes the work. Still, the journey continues. It always does. The caravan departs the oasis shortly after sunrise, following weathered guideposts marking the northern trail. The landscape ahead appears increasingly unreal. Long stretches of pale sand ripple beneath harsh light, while distant ridges shimmer uncertainly through heat and dust. Hours pass slowly, then something appears ahead. At first you mistake it for rock formations protruding from the sand, but as the caravan approaches, shapes emerge more clearly. Crumbling walls, half-buried foundations, the remains of an abandoned settlement slowly disappearing beneath drifting dunes. Nobody speaks for several moments. Ruined cities haunt the Silk Road. Climate shifts, changing trade patterns, warfare, disease, political collapse, failed irrigation systems. Entire communities vanish while the desert patiently erases their outlines. Travellers passing these ruins often leave small offerings behind instinctively, not from formal ritual, from recognition. This could happen to anyone here. A broken wooden beam protrudes from the sand near what once may have been a doorway. Nearby rests a child's ceramic bowl cracked neatly through the middle. You imagine the ordinary life that once existed here. Cooking fires, arguments, weddings, sick children, merchants counting coins beneath lantern light. Now only wind remains. Ren studies the ruins briefly before urging the caravan onward. Do not linger, he says. Perhaps he fears collapse beneath unstable ground. Or perhaps prolonged silence among ruins unsettles him. By late afternoon, the caravan reaches open desert again beneath a sky turning slowly bronze with approaching evening. The air cools rapidly after sunset while travellers gather close around small controlled fires, fueled carefully with dried dung and scrub wood. Resources cannot be wasted here. Across the darkness, the ruins remain faintly visible against moonlit sand. A lost world beside the road west. And tomorrow, the caravan will continue deeper into the emptiness. The desert road begins teaching strange habits. You learn to wake before full daylight because dawn offers the gentlest temperatures. You learn never to waste shade when it appears, even briefly beside a broken wall or lonely tree. You learn how experienced travellers glance instinctively at the sky, wind direction, and animal behaviour all at once. Most importantly, you learn that conversation changes in difficult landscapes. People stop pretending. Several days beyond the abandoned settlement, the caravan reaches the oasis kingdom of Kucha, one of the thriving cultural centres along the northern Silk Road routes. After endless stretches of sand and silence, the city feels almost startlingly alive. Music reaches you before the walls do. Drums, stringed instruments, human laughter carried across dry air. Kucha sits beside precious water and fertile land protected by distant mountains. Traders from many regions gather here to rest, negotiate, gamble, worship, and gather information before continuing west or east. The streets feel narrower and louder than Dunhuang. Market awnings throw shifting shadows across crowded lanes where languages overlap constantly. Chinese, Tocharian, Sogdian, fragments of Indian dialects. You hear words colliding like river currents. The caravan enters through gates painted with fading protective symbols, while local officials inspect cargo records. Nearby, musicians perform outside a wine house where several exhausted camel drivers already appear deeply committed to poor decisions. The smell of roasting meat drifts heavily through the streets. You realize suddenly how hungry you are. Ren leads the group toward a caravanserai operated by Sogdian merchants. The Sogdians have become some of the Silk Road's greatest commercial intermediaries, famous for navigating foreign cultures with astonishing adaptability. They trade silk, spices, silver, glass, horses, paper, dyes, and information with equal enthusiasm. Mostly information. A skilled merchant who knows which kingdom recently raised taxes or which pass became dangerous after snowfall may profit more than a man carrying expensive cargo blindly. Inside the caravanserai courtyard, traders lounge beneath shaded balconies drinking tea while scribes record transactions onto parchment and wooden tablets. Camels kneel beside stacked goods wrapped in thick cloth against dust and theft. A fountain splashes softly at the centre of the courtyard. The sound feels luxurious after days of wind. You meet a Sogdian trader named Varden who dresses in layered robes stitched with bright geometric patterns faded slightly by travel. His beard is carefully trimmed. His eyes miss almost nothing. He greets Ren warmly, though both men clearly begin negotiating before the first smile fully fades. Trade along the Silk Road depends heavily upon personal relationships built over years. Contracts exist, certainly, but trust matters more. Caravans need local guides, translators, safe lodging, and political protection across constantly shifting territories. One dishonest deal can echo for generations. Varden invites the travellers to dinner that evening inside a private reception room overlooking the courtyard. Oil lamps glow against painted walls showing hunting scenes, and musicians with long flowing sleeves. Cushions line the floor beside low wooden tables crowded with food. Flatbread still warm from clay ovens. Lamb cooked with cumin and onions. Apricots soaked in honey. Rice scented faintly with herbs unfamiliar to you. The meal feels almost overwhelming after caravan rations. Around the room sit traders from several regions discussing routes, prices, marriages, local rulers, and rumours from distant courts. One man claims political unrest has disrupted roads farther west near Sogdiana. Another insists Roman demand for silk continues growing despite occasional attempts by authorities to discourage extravagant spending. Apparently wealthy Romans adore silk enough to scandalize conservative moralists. Human beings remain predictable across civilizations. As wine circulates, conversation shifts toward language itself. A translator jokes that merchants eventually speak a private dialect made entirely from bargaining phrases, curses, and requests for water. Varden laughs. Add lies, he says, very important vocabulary. Even Ren smiles at that. Later in the evening, musicians enter carrying lutes, flutes, and hand drums. The performance begins gently, then gradually fills the room with layered rhythms unlike anything heard back in Han territory. Several guests clap softly in time while others simply close their eyes listening. Kucha is famous for music throughout much of Central Asia and China. Court musicians from these western regions will later influence Chinese performance traditions deeply. Melodies travel eastward beside silk and horses just as surely as religion or technology. Culture rarely moves in one direction. You notice Tao sitting completely still during the performance, staring at the musicians with quiet fascination. The road has changed him already. Frontier boys raised beneath Han authority often grow up imagining foreign lands as distant abstractions. Then suddenly the abstraction begins singing. After the meal, Varden walks with you through their night market streets while lantern light flickers across crowded storefronts. Unlike many merchants, he speaks openly about the emotional realities of Silk Road life. Everyone thinks traders worship profit. He says, profit matters because roads are dangerous, but movement becomes addictive. Again, you hear that same idea. Movement itself. He gestures toward the market where strangers from countless backgrounds exchange goods beneath drifting smoke and music. Look carefully, he says. This place should not exist. Different kingdoms, languages, gods, laws. Yet here we are. The observation settles quietly inside you. The Silk Road succeeds not because people trust one another naturally, but because mutual need slowly creates practical cooperation. A Chinese silk merchant may distrust a Sogdian intermediary, politically or culturally, yet still depend upon him completely for survival beyond the frontier. Commerce forces contact. Contact creates familiarity. Familiarity changes civilizations gradually from within. Near midnight, you pass a small Buddhist temple tucked between warehouses and lodging houses. Lamps glow softly inside while travellers kneel in prayer before continuing their journeys. Nearby stands another shrine dedicated to local deities protecting caravans from desert spirits and bandits. Nobody here seems particularly troubled by spiritual overlap. Survival encourages broad-mindedness. Back at the caravanserai, the courtyard quiets slowly while camels grunt in their sleep beside moonlit cargo stacks. A scribe continues working beneath lantern light long after everyone else retires, copying contracts with aching patience. History depends upon tired clerks more often than heroes. Before sleeping, you climb briefly to the rooftop terrace overlooking Kucha beneath the stars. Music still drifts faintly through the warm desert night. Somewhere below, merchants continue bargaining despite the late hour. Tomorrow, new caravans will arrive from farther west carrying unfamiliar goods, stories, and anxieties. Others will depart eastward toward Dunhuang and Chang'an, carrying fragments of this city back with them. No traveller leaves unchanged. And slowly, oasis by oasis, conversation by conversation, the Silk Road keeps stitching distant human worlds together. The days in Kucha pass more slowly than anyone intended. That is the danger of oasis cities. Caravans arrive expecting only rest and resupply, then become entangled in negotiations, repairs, gossip, festivals, illnesses, romances, and political complications that quietly consume entire weeks. The Silk Road runs on delay almost as much as movement. Ren spends long hours meeting with local brokers while Tao disappears whenever possible toward the musicians' quarter near the southern market. You suspect he dreams now of becoming someone larger than the frightened stable boy who left the frontier forts weeks earlier. Travel reshapes ambition, sometimes wisely, sometimes not. One evening, Varden invites several traders and caravan leaders to a banquet hosted by a local noble family connected to regional trade administration. Such gatherings matter enormously along the Silk Road. Wine loosens conversation. Conversation shapes alliances. Alliances protect caravans better than swords alone. You arrive after sunset beneath hanging lanterns that sway gently in warm desert wind. The residence stands behind painted walls overlooking narrow gardens, where water channels reflect flickering light across stone pathways. Servants move quietly between guests, carrying trays of fruit, roasted meats, and silver cups filled with wine scented faintly with spices. After weeks of dust and hardship, the atmosphere feels almost unreal. Inside the reception hall, painted ceilings glow above embroidered wall hangings showing hunting scenes, mountain landscapes, and musicians frozen mid-performance. Incense drifts softly through the room, carrying hints of sandalwood and smoke. The guests represent half the known world: Chinese officials, Sogdian merchants, local aristocrats, Buddhist monks, translators, horse traders from the western valleys. One heavily bearded visitor claims to have travelled near Parthian territory farther west, though several listeners quietly doubt parts of his stories, as they should. The Silk Road rewards exaggeration generously. A local governor named Ashina presides over the banquet with practiced elegance. He speaks several languages well enough to flatter everyone present without fully belonging to any single culture himself. That skill alone has likely preserved his position. Border regions produce complicated identities. During the meal, musicians perform near the far wall while dancers move slowly beneath candlelight, their sleeves flowing like water through the smoky air. The rhythms differ from anything common in Han China, richer, more layered. You notice several Chinese travellers watching with fascinated uncertainty. Foreign beauty often unsettles before it charms. Varden leans closer beside you. After enough years, he says quietly, you stop knowing where the centre of the world is. The sentence lingers. Back in Chang'an, officials describe the empire as civilization's unquestioned centre. Beyond the borders lie lesser cultures orbiting Han greatness. Yet here in Kucha, surrounded by wealth, artistry, and cosmopolitan confidence, the certainty begins dissolving. Every civilization imagines itself central. The Silk Road gently embarrasses that assumption. As wine continues flowing, political discussion gradually surfaces beneath the music and polite laughter. Trade cannot separate itself from power for long. It never has. Ashina speaks cautiously about tensions between neighbouring oasis kingdoms competing for influence over caravan taxation and water rights. Control of wells, mountain passes, and safe routes determine survival in these regions. A single redirected trade route can impoverish entire cities within years. Prosperity here feels precarious. One visiting merchant describes recent raids along western roads by armed groups whose loyalties remain unclear. Bandits sometimes work independently. Sometimes they receive quiet support from rulers seeking leverage over rival trade networks. Official denials arrive quickly afterward, of course. Everyone understands the performance. Across the hall, a Buddhist monk debates philosophy with a Zoroastrian trader, while servants refill their cups repeatedly. Nearby, a Chinese envoy studies foreign textiles with open curiosity, despite trying to appear politically reserved. This is how civilizations truly meet, not through declarations alone. Through shared meals, drunken arguments, admiration, misunderstanding, attraction, commercial necessity. A dancer pauses briefly near the musicians to adjust an ankle bracelet that has loosened during the performance. The tiny human gesture feels oddly intimate amid all the political calculation surrounding her. You realize suddenly how exhausting it must be to entertain wealthy strangers every evening while remaining graceful beneath constant observation. The Silk Road depends heavily upon invisible labor. Cooks, stable workers, servants, translators, porters, scribes. History remembers emperors more easily. Later in the evening, conversation shifts toward Rome, the distant empire at the western edge of Silk Road imagination. Very few people here possess accurate knowledge about it. Most information arrives distorted through layers of intermediaries. Some believe Rome contains cities built entirely from marble. Others insist Westerners drink wine morning until night and bathe constantly. One man claims Roman women wear silk so sheer it scandalizes philosophers. That part may actually be true. The room laughs softly. No direct regular contact exists yet between Han China and Rome. The distance remains too enormous, the intermediaries too numerous. Yet each empire senses the presence of the other vaguely through commerce. Rumour and luxury goods appearing from impossibly distant origins. A relationship built first through imagination. As the banquet deepens into night, several guests grow visibly emotional from wine and fatigue. A horse trader speaks quietly about children he has not seen in nearly 6 years. Another merchant admits he sometimes forgets which language he dreams in now. Movement extracts payment eventually. Vardan himself becomes unusually reflective while standing beside the garden water channels beneath moonlight. "My father died on these roads," he says calmly. "Fever near Samarkand." You offer sympathy, but he waves it away gently. He chose this life willingly. Most of us do. Then, after a pause, "But roads consume people slowly. Families become stories, cities become temporary. Water trickles softly through the narrow channels between you, somewhere inside the residence. Musicians continue playing while guests laugh too loudly at fading jokes. Yet outside, beneath the cool night sky, the mood shifts towards something quieter. The Silk Road creates wealth, knowledge, and connection beyond anything earlier generations imagined possible. It also creates distance, not just geographical distance, emotional distance from ordinary settled life. Near midnight, the gathering finally begins dissolving. Servants extinguish lamps one by one while tired guests prepare for departures in different directions. Tomorrow, some caravans will head west toward Sogdiana and Persia, others east toward Dunhuang and the Han frontier. Everyone carries fragments of everyone else away with them. Music, recipes, words, religious ideas, fashion, memories of strangers beneath lantern light. As you leave the residence with Wren and Tower, warm wind moves softly through the sleeping streets of Kucha. Somewhere nearby, a lone musician continues practicing long after the festivities have ended. The notes drift upward into darkness, and for a moment, standing between empires in a city built from trade and uncertainty, the entire Silk Road feels less like a route and more like a conversation humanity cannot stop having. The caravan leaves Kucha beneath low clouds gathering over the mountains to the north. Rain is rare enough here that people pause to watch the sky with cautious hope. A farmer outside the city walls lifts both hands briefly toward the darkening horizon before returning to work beside an irrigation ditch. Water decides everything in these lands. Wealth, hunger, migration, war, even prayer follows water. The road west curves gradually toward the territories once influenced by the Kushan Empire, whose reach stretches across parts of Central Asia and northern India. Though political control shifts constantly along the Silk Road, Kushan influence still lingers in monasteries, trade practices, languages, and art carried between regions by merchants and pilgrims. Empires fade unevenly. Sometimes armies disappear first while ideas continue travelling for centuries. You notice more Buddhist travellers now moving in both directions along the roads. Some are monks carrying manuscripts wrapped carefully against dust and weather. Others are lay pilgrims seeking sacred sites farther west or east. A few travel entirely alone. That always seems the strangest choice. The desert rarely rewards solitude. Several days beyond Kucha, the caravan joins temporarily with a group of monks heading toward Dunhuang and eventually China's interior. Their leader is a middle-aged scholar named Pranavarma, whose robes have been patched repeatedly over years of travel. His sandals appear one difficult journey away from collapse, yet his eyes remain remarkably calm. During evening rests, Tao asks endless questions about India, monasteries, and Buddhist teachings while pretending not to sound overly eager. Pranavarma answers patiently between sips of thin tea. Yes, elephants are real. No, most monks do not achieve enlightenment beside waterfalls. Yes, travelling during monsoon season is usually miserable. The honesty seems refreshing. One cold evening, the combined travellers shelter beside a cliffside cave used seasonally by caravans during storms. Smoke from cooking fires gathers thickly beneath the stone ceiling, while camels huddle outside against rising wind. The cave walls bear faded drawings left by earlier travellers. Names, symbols, crude prayers asking for safe passage. A child's handprint remains visible near the entrance. You wonder whether that child survived adulthood. Pranavarma sits near the fire, carefully repairing damaged manuscript pages using paste and thin paper strips. Watching him work feels oddly intimate. Each page represents months or years of copying by hand across multiple generations. Knowledge travels physically here. One lost pack animal can erase entire texts forever. The monk notices your attention. Books are fragile creatures, he says softly. Nearby, Ren negotiates loudly with another caravan leader over shared water rights for the next stage of travel. The contrast feels almost absurd. Spiritual preservation beside aggressive haggling over mule access. Yet this is the Silk Road. Sacred ideas and practical survival constantly overlap. Later that night, while wind moans softly outside the cave entrance, Pranavarma tells stories about monasteries in Gandhara, where Greek artistic influence merged unexpectedly with Buddhist imagery after the campaigns of Alexander the Great centuries earlier. Cultures rarely remain pure, he says. The statement would sound dangerous in certain imperial courts. Here it simply sounds observable. He describes statues of the Buddha shaped with flowing robes and facial styles influenced partly by Hellenistic traditions carried eastward through conquest and trade. Chinese pilgrims encountering these images often feel startled at first. Holiness apparently wears many faces. The conversation drifts toward translation difficulties as the fire burns lower. Buddhist teachings moving eastward require constant interpretation between Sanskrit, local Central Asian languages, and Chinese. Some concepts resist direct translation entirely. Pranavarma smiles wearily. A single word can delay understanding for generations. You think of the monk in Dunhuang saying that translation transforms thought itself. Perhaps every civilization partly misunderstands the others around it. Yet somehow communication continues anyway. Imperfectly, humanly. The next morning arrives cold and silver beneath heavy clouds. During travel, the monks chant quietly while walking, their voices rising and falling against the wind with almost hypnotic rhythm. Even the animals seem calmer listening. Around midday, the caravan passes a small monastery built beside a narrow spring emerging from stone. Prayer flags flutter weakly in the cold air, while several novice monks carry buckets between gardens protected by low walls against drifting sand. The monastery survives through discipline, water stored carefully, crops tended patiently, texts copied slowly by hand. Pranavarma explains that monasteries along the Silk Road often serve multiple purposes simultaneously. Spiritual centres, certainly, but also hostels, libraries, medical stations, diplomatic meeting places, and safe resting points for travellers. Religion survive best when useful. A young novice offers the caravan bowls of lentil soup before departure. The food tastes simple but deeply warming after days of dry caravan meals. Tao nearly burns his mouth from eating too quickly. The novice laughs softly. For a brief moment, the road feels gentle, but danger returns quickly along these routes. Late that afternoon, riders appear suddenly across the plain behind the caravan, armed men, difficult to count precisely through blowing dust. Guards tighten formation immediately while merchants begin covering valuable cargo instinctively. Bandits, or soldiers pretending not to be bandits. The distinction matters less than people prefer. Tension spreads rapidly through the caravan line. Camels groan nervously while mounted guards position themselves near the rear. One frightened trader nearly drops an entire crate of ceramics while rushing to secure it. The approaching riders slow within visible distance, then stop. For several long moments nobody moves. Wind pushes sand softly between both groups. Finally the riders turn away without attack, disappearing gradually toward the south. Perhaps they judged the caravan too well defended. Perhaps they sought easier targets. No explanation arrives. Only relief. Afterward, conversation remains subdued for hours. Fear exhausts people differently than labour does. That night the travellers camp beside dry hills streaked pale beneath moonlight. Nobody lights large fires. Guards rotate watch duty carefully while animals remain tethered close together. Pranavarma sits awake beside the smallest remaining flame, turning prayer beads slowly through his fingers. Roads reveal character, he says quietly when you join him. In what way? He watches the darkness for a moment before answering. Some people become cruel when frightened, others become generous. Nearby, One exhausted merchant quietly shares extra blankets with a sick camel driver shivering beneath thin coverings. The monk nods gently toward the scene. Most civilizations are built from small choices like that. The wind softens near dawn. Above the sleeping caravan, clouds finally break apart enough for stars to emerge once more across the endless western sky. Somewhere beyond these mountains and deserts lie India, Persia, and worlds still waiting beyond them. But tonight, beside fading embers and resting animals, the Silk Road feels smaller. Not a grand historical force, just tired human beings carrying fragile hopes through the dark together. Weeks later, the western roads begin filling with stories about Rome again. Not direct stories, of course. Almost nobody along these caravan routes has actually seen the empire with their own eyes. Rome exists mostly as a shimmering idea assembled from fragments. Traders speak of impossible stone cities, endless armies, public baths larger than palaces, and wealthy nobles obsessed with silk so delicate it causes political arguments. The details shift constantly. The fascination does not. You feel the Western pull more strongly now as the caravan moves through increasingly cosmopolitan settlements, where goods from distant civilizations mingle beneath the same market roofs. Chinese silk rests beside Persian metalwork. Indian spices perfume the air near Roman glassware carried across countless exchanges. No single merchant travels the entire route regularly. The Silk Road functions more like a relay of human ambition stretching across continents. One caravan hands goods to another. One language translates into the next. A bolt of silk woven near the Yellow River may pass through dozens of hands before reaching a Roman household years later, and each person touching it adds something invisible. A rumour, a fingerprint, a misunderstanding. You arrive at a bustling caravan city where Western and Eastern influences collide so thoroughly that architecture itself seems undecided. Courtyards built in Central Asian styles surround buildings decorated with motifs borrowed from Persia, India, and farther west. Even the food tastes layered from many origins: coriander, garlic, sesame oil, fermented sauces. The world has begun mixing in the cooking pots first. Varden rejoins the caravan here after conducting separate business farther west. He appears slightly thinner than before, though his mood remains sharp. "Good," he says after seeing everyone alive. "I already promised several people you survived." Ren raises an eyebrow. "You sold information about us?" "Of course." Neither man sounds offended. Inside the crowded market district, you notice a small gathering around a Roman glass merchant displaying translucent bowls that glow softly beneath sunlight. Chinese lacquerware astonishes Western buyers. Roman glass performs the same magic here. Several local children stand staring openly at the objects as though they might dissolve if touched. The merchant himself speaks poor Sogdian and worse Chinese, relying heavily on gestures and a patient translator who looks permanently exhausted. Trade survives through imperfect communication constantly patched together by necessity. You hear the word Da Qin spoken nearby, the Chinese term often used for the Roman Empire. In Han records, Rome becomes half real and half mythical, imagined as a distant civilization strangely comparable to China itself. Some officials speculate the empires mirror one another at opposite ends of the world. Two enormous powers connected indirectly through deserts, mountains, intermediaries, and imagination. Yet they never fully understand each other. In a shaded courtyard tavern later that afternoon, several merchants debate whether Rome truly possesses streets paved entirely from stone. One insists Roman senators wear silk robes so transparent that moral philosophers publicly condemn them for indecency. Another trader claims Roman elites attempt repeatedly to ban silk imports because too much gold flows eastward purchasing luxury goods. That part historians later believe may contain some truth. Luxury reshapes economies quietly. The tavern smells of wine, smoke, sweat, and roasting chickpeas. Musicians perform lazily near the entrance while caravan guards gamble beside a cracked wooden table. One man loses heavily, yet continues smiling with unnerving calm. Perhaps exhaustion has finally numbed him. You sit beside a translator named Syra, who specializes in negotiations between Western merchants and Central Asian intermediaries. She speaks at least 5 languages fluently and complains equally in all of them. Everyone thinks translation means words, she says while tearing flatbread absent-mindedly. Mostly it means explaining why people are offended. You ask which groups prove most difficult. All of them. She laughs softly into her wine cup. Syra describes how Roman buyers react with amazement to silk production rumours emerging from the east. Some imagine silk harvested directly from trees. Others believe it grows from flowers or sea creatures. The Chinese carefully protect the real methods. Empires guard profitable secrets fiercely. As evening approaches, rain begins unexpectedly, drumming softly against rooftops while market crowds rush for shelter beneath awnings and covered walkways. The smell of wet earth rises suddenly through the city, rich and almost emotional after so much dust. People pause to enjoy it. Children run openly through puddles despite furious adults shouting after them. Inside the tavern, conversation grows warmer as travellers settle in against the weather. Stories lengthen. Wine pours more freely. A Western merchant describes seeing Mediterranean harbours crowded with ships carrying grain, marble, olive oil, and slaves from every corner of the Roman world. The scale sounds difficult even for experienced Silk Road travellers to imagine. Civilizations at opposite ends of Eurasia know each other mostly through objects. Silk flowing westward, glass flowing eastward, tiny glimpses exchanged across impossible distance. Late into the evening, Varden produces a folded piece of silk embroidered with golden thread, intended eventually for elite Roman buyers. Candlelight shifts softly across the fabric while nearby travellers lean closer instinctively. It truly is beautiful, light enough to float almost weightlessly between his hands. You think suddenly of Lynn, the elderly woman tending silkworms back near the Han frontier farmhouse weeks ago. Her scarred fingers, the humid room filled with tiny feeding sounds, the exhausting labour hidden inside this shimmering cloth, now destined perhaps for someone who will never even hear China's name spoken correctly. The Silk Road separates labour from consumption across continents. Most empires prefer not thinking about that too carefully. Outside, rain continues falling through the dark streets while the tavern windows fog slightly from crowded warmth inside. Someone begins singing softly near the back wall, a melancholy song about returning home too late. Several listeners quietly stop talking. Movement defines Silk Road life, but permanence remains the secret longing beneath it. Travellers dream constantly of future departures while also aching for stable places waiting somewhere beyond the road. Many never truly find either. Near midnight, Syra steps outside beneath the covered courtyard to breathe cooler air after hours inside the crowded tavern. Rainwater drips steadily from roof tiles into stone basins below. Do you know the strangest thing she asks? What? We trade endlessly between civilizations, yet most people still believe foreigners are fundamentally different. She watches the rain for a moment. Then everyone complains about taxes, misses home, fears illness, worries about children, and drinks too much during storms. You both laugh quietly. Across the Silk Road, empires rise declaring their uniqueness and superiority. But down at ground level, beside caravan fires and crowded taverns, ordinary humanity repeats itself with remarkable consistency. Tomorrow the roads continue westward again through uncertain territories shaped by politics, weather, greed, and faith. Tonight, though, rain falls gently across the caravan city while merchants from opposite ends of the known world sit together beneath warm lantern light sharing stories none of them can fully verify. And somehow, that feels enough. Winter arrives almost without warning. One morning the caravan wakes to thin ice crusting the edges of water buckets, and by evening the wind has turned sharp enough to cut through layered wool and leather alike. Breath hangs pale in the air beside the animals. Travellers move more slowly while packing camp. fingers stiff from cold before sunrise fully reaches the valleys. The Silk Road does not soften during winter. It simply becomes quieter and more dangerous. Many caravans pause travel during the harshest months, waiting inside larger oasis cities for safer conditions. But waiting costs money. Animals still require food. Guards still expect payment. Merchants carrying perishable goods or urgent contracts often continue onward despite the risks. Ren chooses movement. Cold roads are honest roads, he says one bitter morning while tightening saddle straps. Only serious people remain travelling. Several exhausted merchants disagree privately. The western landscape changes beneath winter light. Mountains appear closer now, their ridges hard and metallic beneath low skies. Frost gathers across dry grass beside narrow streams. Even sounds carry differently in cold air, sharper somehow. At midday, the caravan passes another eastbound group struggling through early snowfall. Their camels look thin. One wagon wheel has shattered completely and been repaired poorly with rope and stubbornness. A child rides wrapped in blankets beside her sleeping mother. The sight unsettles everyone quietly. Winter travel exposes vulnerability more openly than summer journeys do. Heat exhausts people. Cold strips them down emotionally. Hunger feels sharper. Loneliness settles deeper. Small discomforts become impossible to ignore. That evening, the caravan shelters inside a stone caravanserai built beside a narrow mountain pass. Thick walls protect against the wind while travellers crowd together around several smoking fires. The building smells heavily of wet wool, horse sweat, garlic stew, and damp leather drying near the flames. Nobody complains about the smell. Warmth outranks dignity in winter. You sit beside Tao while he carefully rubs cracked hands with animal fat to prevent bleeding. Across the room, a physician travelling with another caravan examines an older merchant whose cough has worsened steadily over several days. Illness frightens Silk Road travellers almost as much as bandits. Disease moves efficiently along trade networks. The physician mixes herbs into steaming water while muttering that cold mountain air kills careless men faster than swords do. Nobody argues with him. Dinner arrives in battered iron bowls, passed carefully between travellers seated shoulder to shoulder. Thick barley stew, hard bread softened near the fire, dried fruit saved for morale as much as nutrition. People eat silently at first. Exhaustion creates its own etiquette. Later. Conversation returns gradually while snow begins falling outside the caravanserai walls. You hear it whispering softly against stone and wood through the night. Several travellers move closer to the fires instinctively. A musician from Samarkand unwraps a stringed instrument and begins playing low, quiet melodies near the corner hearth. The music changes the room almost immediately. Faces soften, shoulders unclench slightly. Human beings survive psychologically through small rituals. Music, shared meals, stories repeated beside firelight. Across from you, an older caravan guard named Beck tells Tao about his first winter crossing decades earlier. He describes frozen riverbanks, claps pack animals, and nights so cold men woke fearing they had gone blind because their eyelashes froze shut. Tao looks horrified. Beck grins into his cup. You learned quickly after that. The room laughs softly. Even fear becomes easier to carry collectively. As the evening deepens, snow continues piling quietly outside while travellers settle beneath blankets wherever space allows. Some pray before sleeping, others sharpen knives, mend clothing, or reread letters carried across impossible distances. One merchant unwraps a small wooden toy carved crudely into the shape of a horse. He studies it for a long time before placing it carefully back into his bag. Perhaps his child made it. Perhaps he has missed several birthdays already. Movement along the Silk Road creates prosperity, but also absences stretching across years. Near midnight, you step briefly into the courtyard despite the cold. Snowflakes drift through lantern light while the mountains surrounding the pass disappear into darkness beyond the walls. The silence feels immense. Then you hear coughing from above. On the upper walkway, the sick merchant struggles alone against the cold air. wrapped in blankets too thin for the weather. The physician joins in moments later carrying hot tea. No dramatic speech follows. No revelation. Just one tired human helping another breathe more comfortably through the night. History rarely pauses to record kindness properly. Morning arrives, grey and bitterly cold. Snow covers the road beyond the caravanserai gates while animals snort steam impatiently into the frozen air. Several travellers debate delaying departure. Ren refuses. Storms trap hesitant caravans, he says. Perhaps he believes it. Perhaps movement simply feels safer than waiting. The mountain road beyond the pass proves difficult immediately. Ice hides beneath fresh snow while wagons slip dangerously near narrow ledges. Guards dismount to steady wheels through sharper turns. One mule loses footing briefly and nearly drags an entire cart sideways before ropes hold. Nobody speaks afterward for several minutes. Mortality feels physically close in winter mountains. By afternoon, the weather worsens further. Wind sweeps through the pass carrying needles of snow, hard enough to sting exposed skin. Visibility shrinks steadily. Then the caravan stops. Ahead beside the road rest the remains of another traveller caught by earlier storms. A man wrapped partly in frozen blankets beneath a collapsed pack frame. Snow already covers much of him. No one recognises his face. Perhaps that makes it easier. The caravan pauses long enough for several guards to move the body farther from the road and cover it properly with stones where the ground allows. Nobody searches his belongings aggressively. Nobody jokes. Even hardened travellers grow quiet around death in winter. The road continues afterward beneath worsening skies. Snow crunches beneath boots and hooves while daylight fades too quickly across the mountains. You feel exhaustion settling into everyone around you like additional weight, and yet the caravan keeps moving, because stopping completely can become its own form of surrender. Near dusk, faint lights finally appear ahead through blowing snow. Another shelter station, another temporary refuge against the cold vastness surrounding the road. Tao exhales visibly in relief beside you. Inside the distant walls waits firelight, crowded rooms, wet boots drying beside coals, and strangers grateful simply to have survived another winter day together. Along the Silk Road, that often counts as enough, winter loosens slowly. By the time the caravan descends from the mountain, passes into broader valleys again, patches of exposed earth begin appearing beneath the snow. Thin streams break free from ice along the roadside. Animals move with slightly more energy each morning. People do too. Survival during harsh travel creates a particular kind of temporary intimacy. Strangers who spent winter nights sharing firewood, medicine, and fear now speak with the casual familiarity of old companions. Tao jokes more easily with Beck. Ren even smiles occasionally without looking suspicious afterward. Almost, the western routes grow busier again as seasonal movement resumes. Caravans emerge from winter shelter cities carrying fresh goods, repaired equipment, and new political rumours gathered during months of forced waiting. And the rumours this year sound troubling. Nomadic confederations across the northern steppe have begun shifting alliances again. Frontier raids increase near several trade corridors. Certain oasis kingdoms now demand higher transit taxes to fund military defences. Everyone claims someone else started the tensions first. That part never changes. Empires and nomadic powers have circled one another uneasily across Central Asia for centuries. Chinese dynasties build walls, forts, and diplomatic marriages trying to secure their borders. Steppe confederations respond with raids, treaties, trade agreements, and sudden betrayals whenever advantage appears. Neither side fully defeats the other for long. The Silk Road exists partly because of this unstable balance. Trade often flourishes not despite political tension, but through it. Nomadic groups control horses, mobility, and strategic routes. Settled empires control agricultural wealth, manufactured goods, and enormous populations. Each side needs something from the other eventually. Even enemies become business partners sometimes. One windy afternoon, The caravan reaches a fortified settlement crowded with mounted riders from several steppe tribes negotiating trade agreements with local officials. The atmosphere feels tense beneath its outward politeness. Armed men stand everywhere, pretending not to monitor one another constantly. Horse breath clouds the cold air. You notice immediately how differently the nomadic riders carry themselves compared to settled merchants or soldiers. More relaxed in the saddle, more alert outdoors. Many have spent their entire lives moving across open grasslands where survival depends upon speed, memory, and instinct rather than walls. A local interpreter quietly warns travelers not to stare too long at anyone's weapons. Men discussing peace enjoy displaying war, she says dryly. Inside the settlement's main hall, negotiations continue over livestock exchanges, trade rights, and safe passage guarantees for upcoming caravan seasons. Silk hangs beside horse tack and bundles of furs awaiting inspection. Translators move endlessly between languages while exhausted scribes record agreements likely to collapse within a year anyway. Still, everyone participates seriously. Temporary stability remains valuable. Ren meets privately with a nomadic trader named Korchi, whose weathered face looks carved directly from wind and sun. Unlike many frontier warriors described in imperial records, Korchi speaks thoughtfully and laughs easily. The Chinese always imagine steppe people waking each morning eager to raid villages, he says while pouring fermented mare's milk into wooden cups. Aren't they wrong? Sometimes Ren asks. Of course, sometimes we wake eager to trade first. The men laugh together. Imperial histories often portray nomadic cultures simplistically, reducing entire societies into threats orbiting civilized states. Yet the reality across the Silk Road proves more complicated. Steppe peoples develop sophisticated political systems, trade networks, oral traditions, and military tactics shaped by environments settled empires struggle to survive within. Different worlds create different strengths. That evening, riders from several groups gather outside the settlement walls for horse demonstrations and archery contests, partly intended as entertainment, partly as subtle intimidation. Fires burn against the darkening plain while mounted archers race across open ground, loosing arrows at distant targets with astonishing accuracy. Tao watches completely mesmerized. One rider twists sideways beneath his galloping horse's neck while firing backward at full speed. The crowd erupts in admiration. Even Ren whistles softly. You begin understanding why settled empires feared these mobile warrior societies so deeply. Their relationship with horses borders on inseparable. Children learn riding almost before walking confidently. Entire military systems emerge from lives spent moving across enormous grasslands. Civilizations shape bodies as much as ideas. After the competitions, shared feasting begins beneath large felt tents warmed by central fires. Roasted meat hangs heavy in the air beside smoke and fermented milk. Musicians perform songs carried through generations without written records. A young steppe woman sings with a voice so hauntingly clear that conversation gradually stops across the tent. Even travelers who understand none of the words listen closely. Emotion survives translation better than politics does. Later in the evening, Korchi speaks more seriously beside the fire while sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate movements. Empires believe walls create safety, he says. Grasslands teach movement instead. He gestures vaguely toward the darkness beyond the settlement. Storms come, rivers change, herds migrate. You survive by adapting quickly. The observation extends beyond geography. Along the Silk Road, rigidity often becomes dangerous. Successful traders learn foreign customs. Translators navigate conflicting expectations. Border cities absorb outside influences rather than resisting every change. Movement rewards flexibility relentlessly. Meanwhile, empires continue drafting maps with clean lines through territories where human loyalty remains far messier. Near midnight, news arrives that fighting recently erupted farther east between frontier troops and raiding groups near a strategic pass. Details remain uncertain. Accounts contradict each other immediately. Some witnesses blame desperate nomads after harsh winter losses. Others accuse corrupt local commanders provoking conflict intentionally. No clear agreement survives by morning, but tension spreads through the settlement anyway. Caravan leaders begin recalculating routes over cups of bitter tea while guards inspect equipment more carefully before sleep. Trade adapts quickly to instability because it must. The Silk Road never truly rests upon peace alone. It survives through negotiation with danger. Before dawn, you walk briefly beyond the settlement while frost still covers the plain silver beneath fading stars. Horses graze quietly near tether posts, while distant riders patrol the horizon against pale blue light. The air smells clean and painfully cold. You think about the endless cycles shaping these roads, empires rising confidently, nomadic confederations expanding suddenly across the grasslands, treaties forming beside banquet tables before collapsing beneath ambition or hunger. Yet caravans continue moving through it all. Silk, paper, spices, religious texts, human longing carried carefully across difficult ground. As sunrise spreads slowly over the steppe, riders begin preparing for departure in every direction. East toward China, west toward Persia, north into the grasslands, south toward mountain kingdoms. The Silk Road stretches onward between them all, held together less by governments than by the stubborn human refusal to remain isolated forever. By the time you return eastward months later, Chang'an no longer feels entirely familiar. That surprises you. The city remains enormous, disciplined, and dazzling in all the expected ways. Its walls still rise massively above crowded avenues. Market districts still pulse with noise from dawn until deep into the night. Officials still hurry through the streets, clutching documents with the strained expressions of men permanently late for something. And yet you notice details differently now. The smell of foreign spices drifting through Western markets, the accents layered beneath ordinary conversation, the astonishing number of people carrying worlds inside them. Travel changes not only how you see distant places, but how you see home. The caravan enters Chang'an through the western districts crowded with merchants, diplomats, pilgrims, labourers, entertainers, and traders from across Eurasia. Some wear Persian robes, others arrive from Korean kingdoms, Indian monasteries, Central Asian oasis cities, or nomadic territories beyond the frontier. The capital of the Han world has become something larger than itself, an imperial crossroads. You move through broad avenues lined with shops displaying lacquerware, silk, bronze mirrors, imported gemstones, incense, carved ivory, and glass bowls expensive enough to stop pedestrians mid-step. Food vendors shout over one another while steam rises from cooking stalls into warm evening air. After months of caravan hardship, the abundance feels almost excessive, yet beneath the grandeur, ordinary life continues stubbornly. Laundry hangs between buildings. Children chase dogs through muddy alleys. A tired woman argues with a vegetable seller over onions. Empires always contain both spectacle and exhaustion simultaneously. Ren parts ways with a caravan near the Western Market District after securing warehouse storage for several shipments. He appears restless already, as though still hearing distant roads calling faintly beneath the city noise. "Too many walls here," he mutters. You suspect he means it. Tao disappears almost immediately toward music houses rumoured to host performers from Kucha and Sogdiana. Months ago, he would have wandered Chang'an nervously. Now he moves through the city with new confidence sharpened by travel and hardship. The road has entered him permanently. That evening, you wander through the Western Market beneath lantern light while the city settles gradually into night. Chang'an during the Han and later Tang periods becomes one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities on Earth. Foreign communities establish neighbourhoods here. Translators, monks, musicians, diplomats, and merchants create entire worlds within the imperial capital. The Silk Road does not merely bring goods eastward, it reshapes the city itself, near one crowded intersection. A storyteller entertains listeners with exaggerated tales about western deserts filled with ghosts and giant birds capable of carrying camels away into storms. Several children look appropriately horrified. A caravan guard nearby whispers, "Honestly, the ghost would be easier than taxes." The listeners laugh. Further along, music spills from a tea house where foreign instruments blend with Chinese melodies in ways older generations sometimes find unsettling. Cultural mixing always alarms someone eventually, yet audiences keep arriving. Inside the tea house, merchants recline beside low tables discussing trade routes while servants refill cups with practiced efficiency. Incense curls upward through warm lamplight. A dancer from Central Asia performs slowly while musicians accompany her on lutes and flutes imported or adapted from Western traditions. You notice how naturally the crowd accepts the performance. Foreign influences once considered strange have already begun embedding themselves into urban life. Fashion changes. Music evolves. Cuisine absorbs unfamiliar ingredients. Even language quietly adopts borrowed terms from traders and travellers. Civilizations transform gradually enough that people rarely notice while living through it. At a nearby table, two scholars debate Buddhism's growing influence in China. One worries foreign religious ideas may weaken traditional values. The other argues that intellectual exchange strengthens civilizations rather than threatening them. Neither man convinces the other. The discussion is likely repeated across generations already. Outside, the streets glow gold beneath hanging lanterns while distant bells mark the passing hours. Chang'an enforces strict nighttime regulations in many districts, yet parts of the city remain stubbornly awake long after curfew approaches. Trade rarely sleeps completely. You pass a lodging house where newly arrived travellers from the western regions unload cargo beneath torchlight. Their faces carry the familiar exhaustion of long-distance movement. Dust still coats their boots and cloaks. One young merchant kneels beside a water basin washing sand slowly from cracked hands. The sight feels strangely intimate. No matter how grand the empire becomes, the Silk Road still depends upon tired individuals arriving one caravan at a time. Near midnight, you visit a Buddhist monastery on the edge of the Western District where foreign monks collaborate with Chinese scholars translating sacred texts. Lanterns glow softly through paper windows while brushes scratch steadily against parchment inside. Translation work continues deep into the night. A monk named Hui Yuan explains the enormous challenge facing them. Many Buddhist concepts arriving from India and Central Asia resist easy conversion into Chinese philosophical language. Some meanings shift subtly. Others fracture entirely. Sometimes, he says softly, we spend weeks discussing one sentence. You remember Pranavarma beside the cave fire far to the west, saying that a single word can delay understanding for generations. The Silk Road moves ideas quickly. Understanding follows more slowly. Inside the translation hall, scrolls cover low tables beside inkstones and cups of cold, forgotten tea. Several exhausted scholars continue debating terminology while rubbing tired eyes beneath flickering lamps. Their work feels painstaking and fragile. Yet centuries later, entire civilizations may think differently because of these quiet nighttime conversations. History often turns invisibly. Outside the monastery, the city air carries distant music mixed with horse smells, smoke, and summer humidity trapped between crowded streets. You climb a small terrace overlooking the Western District while lanterns shimmer endlessly below like scattered embers. Chang'an no longer appears simply Chinese. Not entirely. The city has absorbed influences from across Eurasia until its identity itself becomes layered and evolving. Some citizens welcome this richness enthusiastically. Others fear moral decline or foreign contamination. Both reactions are deeply human. Cultural exchange creates excitement and anxiety together. Below you, somewhere in the sleeping city, Tao likely listens to Western musicians beside crowded wine cups. Ren perhaps studies route maps already planning another departure. Foreign monks continue translating difficult texts, while caravan guards dream uneasily of deserts and mountain roads. And beyond the western horizon, the Silk Road continues breathing, caravans moving steadily through darkness, empires trading luxuries and suspicions, human beings carrying pieces of one another across impossible distances, changing slowly with every journey even when they believe themselves unchanged. Chang'an glows warmly beneath the midnight sky. Not the end of the road, only another beginning. In the years that follow, the Silk Road begins carrying quieter revolutions. Not armies, not emperors, objects so ordinary at first glance that few people recognize how completely they will reshape the world. You notice it slowly in Chang'an. Tea houses multiplying beside busy market streets, paper appearing more commonly in the hands of clerks, scholars, merchants, and monks. Strange chemical mixtures experimented with by alchemists pursuing immortality and accidentally discovering something far more dangerous. History rarely announces its biggest changes dramatically. Sometimes transformation arrives folded inside a sheet of paper. One humid summer evening, you visit a paper workshop near the Eastern Canal districts where labourers work knee-deep in water and pulp beneath open wooden sheds. The air smells damp, fibrous, and faintly sour from soaking bark and old rags. Compared to silk production, paper making appears almost unglamorous. Yet perhaps even more important, an older craftsman named Shen demonstrates the process patiently while wiping sweat from his brow with permanently stained hands. Mulberry bark, hemp waste, fishing nets, cloth scraps, everything beaten into pulp, suspended in water, lifted carefully through bamboo screens, then dried into thin sheets beneath sunlight. Simple in principle, civilization changing in practice. Before paper spreads widely, knowledge travels through expensive silk manuscripts, bamboo strips, carved wood, or oral memory. Writing remains physically heavy and difficult to reproduce in large quantities. Paper changes scale, suddenly contracts, letters, religious texts, poetry, records, maps, and ideas themselves move more freely along trade routes. Bureaucracies expand, education spreads, religions preserve teachings more effectively. The Silk Road becomes not only a route for goods, but for information. Shen lifts a fresh sheet carefully toward the light. People think silk made us rich. He says paper made us organized. You suspect future generations will underestimate that sentence badly. Outside the workshop, canal boats drift slowly beneath evening haze carrying grain, ceramics, timber, and bundles of paper destined for distant regions. Somewhere westward, merchants and monks will eventually carry these techniques across Central Asia toward the Islamic world and later Europe. Knowledge leaks through borders eventually. Empires never fully prevent it. A few streets away, tea houses overflow with conversation despite the summer heat. Tea itself has existed in China for centuries already, but its cultural role continues deepening as trade networks expand. Travellers returning from difficult journeys crave it. Scholars discuss philosophy over it. Officials conduct negotiations beside steaming cups. Entire social rhythms begin forming around tea. Inside one crowded house, the smell wraps around you immediately. Bitter leaves, wet wood, warm ceramic cups handled by countless fingers over the years. Rain taps softly against the roof while travellers exchange news from the western roads. A merchant complains about rising transport costs through mountain passes. Another describes paper documents now replacing certain wooden records in frontier administration. Small innovations spread quietly until suddenly they seem inevitable. Near the back wall, Tao sits with several musicians and translators. Older now and visibly changed by repeated journeys westward. His clothing blends styles from multiple regions unconsciously. Even his gestures have shifted slightly. The road reshapes bodies over time. He greets you warmly before returning to an animated argument about musical notation and foreign rhythms, with a Sogdian performer who insists Chinese court music lacks sufficient emotional chaos. Tao strongly disagrees. Their debate appears delightfully endless. Across the room, An alchemist named Master Chu entertains listeners with theories about balancing internal energies and achieving longevity through rare compounds. Several younger men listen with dangerous fascination while he describes experiments involving sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter. Most people laugh politely. A few take notes seriously. Nobody yet imagines these strange chemical mixtures eventually becoming gunpowder. History hides inside accidents constantly. Later that evening, heavy rain cools the city at last. Water pours through crowded streets while lantern reflections tremble across flooded stones. You walk beneath covered walkways toward the government districts where clerks still work late, copying reports onto paper documents stacked in astonishing quantities. Paper transforms administration mercilessly. Empires can suddenly track taxes, census data, military supplies, legal disputes, and trade agreements with greater efficiency than ever before. More records survive, more orders travel farther, more lives become visible to governments. Progress often arrives carrying surveillance quietly beside convenience. Inside one office building, exhausted scribes continue working by lamplight despite the hour, their fingers blackened with ink, their shoulders stiff from endless copying. One clerk yawns without apology. Paper multiplies work, he mutters. Perhaps another truth future generations will rediscover repeatedly. Beyond Chang'an, caravans continue carrying these innovations westward piece by piece. Tea compressed into bricks for easier transport. Paper samples exchanged between craftsmen. Alchemical knowledge discussed among scholars and mystics moving between courts and monasteries. The Silk Road spreads technologies unevenly. Some regions adopt innovations eagerly. Others resist for generations. Certain ideas transform when adapted to local needs and materials. No invention remains culturally unchanged while travelling. Near midnight, you visit the Western District once more, where foreign traders gather beneath hanging lanterns despite lingering rain. A Persian merchant examines Chinese paper with open fascination while discussing potential uses for bookkeeping and correspondence. Nearby, a monk carefully protects wrapped manuscripts beneath oilcloth coverings against the weather. Human beings understand instinctively when information matters. The rain finally slows near dawn. Mist rises softly from the canals while early workers begin reopening market stalls beneath dripping awnings. Chang'an smells wash clean for the first time in weeks. Wet stone, tea leaves, smoke from breakfast fires. You think about the strange nature of historical importance. Emperors believe they shape the future through conquest and decree. Yet often the deeper transformations come from quieter sources. A monk translating texts beside a lantern, a craftsman drying paper sheets in humid air, a trader carrying tea across mountains, an eccentric alchemist mixing powders carelessly in pursuit of immortality. The Silk Road connects civilizations materially. Certainly, but more than that, it allows ordinary human curiosity to travel farther than any empire can fully control. And once ideas begin moving freely, they become very difficult to stop. As morning sunlight spreads gradually across the waking city, caravans prepare again for departure westward carrying silk, spices, paper, tea, rumours, and fragile hopes towards worlds still waiting beyond the horizon. The road continues breathing quietly beneath it all, always moving, always changing the people who trust themselves to it. The mountains return first. Long before you reach the high passes, the air begins changing. Colder mornings, sharper winds, rivers running fast with snow melt beneath narrow bridges that creak beneath caravan weight. The road south and west grows steeper as routes branch toward territories increasingly shaped by Tibetan power. The Silk Road never belongs permanently to anyone. Empires grasp at it for centuries anyway. By this period, the Tibetan plateau has become home to expanding kingdoms ambitious enough to challenge neighbouring powers across Central Asia. Control over mountain passes means control over trade, and trade means wealth, intelligence, political leverage, and survival. Every major power eventually understands this. The caravan you travel beside now moves cautiously through valleys where loyalties remain uncertain. Fortified towers appear more frequently along ridgelines. Travellers speak quietly around strangers until affiliations become clearer. Mountain politics reward patience. Ren, older now and carrying more grey in his beard than before, studies route maps each evening with visible irritation. Several passes once considered reliable have become unstable after recent conflicts between local rulers and Tibetan forces pushing outward across the plateau regions. Mountains remember wars longer than cities do, Beck says one night beside the fire. He taps ash thoughtfully into the dirt. Roads stay dangerous years after treaties. The caravan camps that evening beside a cold river cutting through steep cliffs striped black and red beneath fading sunlight. Wind funnels through the valley carrying the smell of wet stone and distant pine forests higher in the mountains. The air feels cleaner here, and lonelier. A group of Tibetan traders arrives shortly before dark leading sturdy mountain horses loaded with wool, salt, medicinal herbs, and carved turquoise jewellery wrapped carefully in leather. Their clothing differs sharply from lowland styles. Thick layered fabrics, heavy boots, fur-lined cloaks against brutal highland weather. One rider carries a prayer wheel turning slowly in his hand even while dismounting. The travellers greet one another cautiously at first, then more warmly after tea begins circulating. Trade softens suspicion faster than diplomacy sometimes can. A Tibetan merchant named Tsering joins your fire while snow clouds gather above the peaks. He speaks several regional languages imperfectly but confidently enough to negotiate prices and joke with caravan guards. "You lowland people fear altitude more than bandits," he says, smiling faintly. "Altitude kills quietly," Ren replies. "So do taxes." Again the firelight fills with tired laughter. Tsering describes the expanding influence of Tibetan rulers across strategic mountain corridors connecting India, Central Asia, and Western China. Fortresses rise beside key passes. Military patrols monitor caravan movement. Political marriages attempt stabilizing fragile alliances. For now, nothing in these regions remains stable permanently. You notice how naturally the conversation moves between commerce and warfare. Along the Silk Road, the distinction often blurs. Traders gather intelligence unintentionally. Armies depend upon merchant supply lines. Local rulers tax caravans partly to fund defences protecting the very roads being taxed. Civilization forms loops inside loops. That night, snow began falling heavily after midnight. You wake repeatedly to wind battering the tents while animals shift restlessly outside. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse breaks tether briefly before shouting and scrambling footsteps bring it under control again. Mountain weather changes with frightening speed. By dawn, the valley lies buried beneath fresh snow, glowing pale blue under weak sunlight. The caravan delays departure while travellers clear ice from equipment and debate conditions farther ahead. Tsering watches the peaks silently. "The pass will close soon," he says. No one questions him. Mountain people learn weather the way sailors learn tides. The journey upward becomes difficult immediately. Narrow paths wind beside cliffs where loose stones vanish endlessly into white mist below. Breath grows shorter at higher elevation. Even experienced animals struggle through deeper drifts. Conversation fades. Everyone concentrates on movement itself. Around midday, the caravan passes a small mountain monastery built improbably against a cliff face overlooking the valley. Prayer flags whip violently in the wind while smoke rises from chimneys blackened by years of harsh winters. The monastery appears almost grown from the stone itself. Several monks emerge carrying hot broth for travellers attempting the crossing before conditions worsen further. Their generosity feels astonishing given the isolation. One elderly monk studies the caravan carefully while distributing bowls. "Roads exist because strangers help one another," he says quietly. Simple words. Perhaps the entire Silk Road explained properly. Inside the monastery shelter, travellers crowd close around iron stoves radiating precious warmth. Wet boots steam beside the fires while monks chant softly, somewhere deeper within the stone halls. The atmosphere feels suspended outside ordinary time. A young novice shows Tao murals painted along one corridor depicting caravans crossing mountains beneath protective deities and swirling clouds. Some images have faded badly from smoke and age. Others remain vivid. Generations of travellers passed through here before you. Generations will come afterward. If the roads survive, during the afternoon, news arrives from another caravan descending the pass. Fighting reportedly erupted farther north between Tibetan forces and regional allies of Chinese interests. Several trade stations have closed temporarily. No one agrees on details completely. Still, anxiety spreads quickly through the shelter rooms. Conflict in mountain corridors disrupts entire trade systems rapidly. Caravans reroute. Prices rise. Isolated settlements face shortages. Travellers disappear. The Silk Road depends upon fragile cooperation more than most empires admit. That evening, Tsering shares barley wine beside the stove while snow thickens outside once more. He speaks about life on the plateau where winter lasts brutally long and survival depends heavily upon community discipline. In the mountains, he says, pride freezes faster than humility. The statement settles warmly into the tired silence around the fire. Nearby, Beck repairs cracked harness leather carefully despite exhaustion. A monk copies manuscripts beside flickering butter lamps. Tao listens to foreign songs from mountain traders while snow buries the road beyond the walls. Civilizations continue meeting even during storms, perhaps especially during storms. Before sleep, you step briefly outside onto the monastery terrace overlooking the valley, now hidden beneath darkness and blowing snow. Prayer flags snap sharply overhead. The cold feels almost unreal against your face. Far below, invisible beneath drifting whitened mountain shadow, the Silk Road continues winding through valleys, deserts, cities, and empires. Not one road, thousands of human decisions stitched together across centuries. And tonight, high in the Tibetan shadows, those fragile connections feel both impossibly vulnerable and strangely enduring at the same time. Centuries pass along the Silk Road the way seasons pass through mountain valleys. Quietly at first, then all at once. Dynasties rise and fracture. Oasis kingdoms change hands repeatedly. Religions spread, divide, adapt, and settle into local customs. Yet the roads continue carrying people west and east across the breadth of Eurasia. And now, farther west, another great centre of learning begins drawing the world toward it. Baghdad. The city rises under the Abbasid Caliphate beside the Tigris River, becoming one of the intellectual capitals of the medieval world. Caravans approaching from Central Asia speak of crowded libraries, astronomers studying the heavens from rooftop observatories, physicians preserving ancient medical knowledge, and scholars translating texts from Greek, Persian, Indian, and Chinese traditions alike. For travellers along the Silk Road, Baghdad begins to feel almost mythological. Yet unlike many myths, the city truly exists. You arrive there slowly after months crossing deserts, caravan towns, and fertile valleys transformed by irrigation systems more elaborate than many Eastern travellers imagined possible. Palm groves spread beside canals glittering under brutal summer sunlight. Markets spill across entire districts beneath woven awnings shielding crowds from the heat. The air smells dense and layered. Dates, cinnamon, animal sweat, ink, river water warming beneath the sun. Compared to Chang'an, Baghdad feels less ceremonially ordered but equally alive. Human movement floods every street. Merchants shout prices in Arabic, Persian, Turkic languages, and countless regional dialects. Scholars hurry beside labourers carrying baskets of figs. Water sellers ring brass cups together while calling through the crowds. Civilization hums loudly here. The caravan lodges inside a sprawling caravanserai near the commercial districts where traders from across Eurasia unload silk. porcelain, paper, spices, glassware, furs, perfumes, and manuscripts. Camels groan beneath heavy cargo while scribes record transactions continuously beneath shaded galleries. Paper appears everywhere now. That changes everything. The technology once carefully developed in China has spread westward through trade, migration, diplomacy, and eventually conflict. After encounters between Chinese and Abbasid forces generations earlier, paper-making knowledge moves increasingly into the Islamic world where craftsmen refine and expand production dramatically. Books become more accessible. Knowledge travels faster. Empires think more widely. One afternoon, you visit a paper market where stacks of fresh sheets tower beside ink makers, bookbinders, and calligraphers. The sound of brushes and reed pens scratching across paper fills the warm air almost like insects humming. A scholar named Yusuf invites you into a crowded workshop attached to a library where translators labour over texts gathered from many civilizations. Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, Persian astronomy, Chinese technical writings carried westward across the Silk Road. No single culture owns wisdom completely here. That idea feels important. Yusuf himself studies astronomy and geography beneath scholars sponsored by wealthy patrons who consider learning a sacred responsibility. He speaks with restless excitement while unrolling star charts across a low table stained heavily with ink. The world grows larger every generation, he says. Then he smiles, or perhaps we only notice it more. Around the room, translators debate terminology while copying manuscripts by hand. One man argues passionately about mathematical notation. Another compares medical treatments described in Persian and Indian texts. The atmosphere feels intensely alive, not quiet scholarship sealed away from ordinary life, but knowledge moving dynamically through trade networks, political systems, and religious curiosity. The Silk Road no longer carries only luxuries. It carries intellectual momentum. That evening, Yusuf guides you through Baghdad's evening markets beside the river. Lanterns glow warmly against the dark water, while musicians perform beneath balconies crowded with listeners escaping the day's heat. You hear stories from everywhere. African sailors describing monsoon winds in the Indian Ocean, Persian merchants debating taxes, travellers from Central Asia discussing dangerous mountain crossings, a physician explaining surgical techniques learned through translated Greek texts. The city absorbs the world continuously. Near one busy square, you pass an observatory where astronomers track planetary movements with astonishing precision for the era. Their calculations draw from multiple traditions, combined gradually over generations. Chinese astronomy contributed observations. Indian mathematics shaped computation. Greek models influence theory. Civilization advances collectively more often than empires admit. Later, inside a tea house overlooking the river, Yusuf speaks quietly about the importance of curiosity itself. Trade begins with profit, he says. But eventually people want understanding too. Outside, boats drift slowly along the Tigris carrying grain, textiles, and travellers beneath moonlit water. Somewhere beyond the western horizon lie Byzantine territories in the Mediterranean world. To the east stretch Persia, Central Asia, and China. Baghdad stands between worlds, gathering them inward. You think again about the old monk in Dunhuang saying translation transforms thought itself. Here in Baghdad, entire intellectual traditions meet, argue, merge, and evolve through translation movements supported by rulers who understand knowledge as a form of power. Ideas become geopolitical. Mathematics improves navigation. Astronomy shapes calendars and trade. Medicine preserves armies and cities. Paper multiplies everything, yet ordinary human life continues beneath these grand developments. Children chase each other through market alleys. Bakers sweat beside ovens before dawn. Tired merchants fall asleep mid-conversation after long caravan journeys. One evening rainstorm sends everyone scrambling beneath crowded awnings, while strangers complain together about weather, as though empires and religions matter less than staying dry. Perhaps sometimes they do. Before leaving Baghdad, you visit the House of Wisdom, or at least one version remembered through surviving accounts and later descriptions. Historians still debate certain details about its exact structure and organization. But there is little doubt Baghdad became one of history's great centers of learning during this era. Inside the scholarly halls, manuscripts line shelves beside astronomical instruments and maps gradually improving through accumulated observation. Scholars from different backgrounds work side by side, translating, debating, calculating. The room smells of ink, parchment, oil lamps, and old paper. Human thought made physical, a translator pauses while copying text and flexes cramped fingers beside the candlelight. The tiny gesture moves you unexpectedly. Civilization depends upon tired people continuing careful work late into the night. Outside, Baghdad glows beneath the warm darkness beside the river, while caravans prepare again for departure in every direction. Eastward toward China, south toward Indian Ocean ports, west toward Damascus and Mediterranean cities. The Silk Road has grown far beyond silk now. It has become a circulatory system for human knowledge itself. And still, beneath all the scholarship and empire, it remains what it always was. People carrying pieces of their worlds towards strangers, hoping something valuable survives the journey. The sea begins replacing the desert. Not immediately. At first, the change arrives through rumour carried into caravan cities by sailors smelling faintly of salt and tar. Merchants begin speaking more often about ports instead of passes, monsoon winds instead of mountain weather, ships instead of camels. Then gradually the roads themselves start bending southward. For centuries, overland caravans dominated long-distance trade between east and west despite their dangers. But maritime routes across the Indian Ocean now expand rapidly, linking China, Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and East Africa through increasingly sophisticated networks of seasonal navigation. Water changes commerce profoundly. Ships carry heavier cargo than camels ever could, and so you travel toward the coast. The journey eastward eventually reaches the bustling port cities of southern China, where humid air clings to skin and foreign ships crowd harbours thick as forests. Compared to the dry silence of Central Asian deserts, these places feel overwhelming in entirely new ways. Everything moves constantly. Dock workers shout across the piers while ropes creak against wooden hulls. Fish scales glitter beneath morning light beside heaps of pepper. Cloves, sandalwood, ceramics, lacquerware, ivory, and silk bundled carefully against sea moisture. The smell strikes first. Salt water, rotting seaweed, smoke, spices so strong they sting the nose. The Silk Road has reached the ocean and transformed itself again. You stand beside the harbour watching enormous trading vessels unload cargo from across the Indian Ocean world. Arab merchants negotiate beside Chinese officials while interpreters rush between them, carrying fragments of conversation through half a dozen languages. A sailor nearby laughs that ports create more arguments than storms. Possibly true. You board a merchant vessel preparing to sail southwest with the monsoon winds towards Southeast Asian and Indian ports. The ship's captain, a broad-shouldered man named Hassan, distrusts nearly everyone equally and appears proud of this quality. Sea trade rewards paranoia, he says while inspecting cargo manifests. The vessel itself feels miraculous compared to overland caravans. Compartments carefully sealed against flooding. Navigation tools refined through generations of maritime knowledge. Sails designed to harness predictable seasonal winds crossing the Indian Ocean. The sea creates different civilizations than deserts do. Sailors think in currents, storms, stars, and timing. Miss the monsoon season badly enough and entire journeys collapse into delay and starvation. Ports rise wealthy almost overnight if trade shifts favourably. Others fade into obscurity when shipping patterns change. Movement governs survival everywhere. Life aboard ship compresses humanity tightly together. Merchants, sailors, translators, cooks, guards, and pilgrims share limited space beneath endless sky and shifting water. Privacy nearly disappears. So do illusions. You learn quickly who becomes calm during storms and who vomits immediately after mild waves. One wealthy merchant from inland China spends the first 3 days convinced the ocean personally hates him. The crew finds this extremely entertaining. At night, the ship rocks gently beneath stars so bright they seem close enough to touch. Sailors navigate partly through memorized constellations, passed between generations alongside practical experience, impossible to write fully into manuals. Hassan points toward the dark horizon one evening while warm wind fills the sails. The sea punishes arrogance faster than deserts, he says, perhaps because drowning feels more immediate than thirst. Weeks into the voyage, monsoon storms finally arrive. The sky darkens unnaturally fast one afternoon while crew members secure ropes and cargo with practiced urgency. Rain slams against the deck hard enough to blur vision. Waves rise enormous beneath the ship, lifting and dropping the vessel with sickening force. Below deck, passengers huddle together listening to wood groan under pressure. Fear smells different at sea. Sweat, bilge water, lamp oil swinging wildly through darkness. One sailor prays continuously through the storm while another curses the weather with impressive creativity in 3 languages simultaneously. Human coping strategies vary widely. Hours pass uncertainly. Then slowly toward dawn, the winds weaken. Exhausted silence settles across the battered ship afterward, while survivors emerge blinking into pale morning light. The ocean stretches calm again as though nothing happened. That feels almost insulting. Hassan inspects damaged rigging while muttering calculations about repairs and schedules. Trade never pauses long for reflection. The voyage continues westward through ports alive with cultural mixing on a scale rivaling any Silk Road city inland. In Srivijaya, Indian, Arab, Chinese, and local Southeast Asian influences blend beneath humid skies and crowded harbour markets. In Indian ports, spices move outward toward the wider world in astonishing quantities. Pepper alone reshapes economies. Entire fortunes rise and collapse over flavour. You notice how maritime trade accelerates cultural exchange even further than caravan routes sometimes could. Ships carry larger groups of people together for longer periods. Port cities become multilingual almost by necessity. Religion spread rapidly through merchant communities establishing permanent settlements abroad. Mosques rise near Buddhist temples. Chinese ceramics appear in East African coastal towns. Indian mathematics travels with sailors and scholars alike. The ocean dissolves isolation relentlessly, yet maritime trade carries dangers beyond storms. Piracy thrives across certain routes where fragmented political control and immense wealth create temptation impossible to resist. One humid evening near the Strait of Malacca, lookouts spot suspicious vessels trailing at a distance behind the convoy. Tension spreads immediately. Guards sharpen blades while archers prepare near the rails. Hassan orders lanterns reduced after dark. Pirates prefer merchants who look relaxed, he says. Nobody sleeps deeply that night. The suspicious ships eventually disappear before dawn. Perhaps deterred by the convoy's numbers or defensive readiness, no attack comes. Still, the fear lingers afterward. Trade routes create predators naturally. On land, bandits stalk mountain passes and desert wells. At sea, pirates emerge from hidden coves watching heavy merchant ships drift fat with cargo across predictable routes. Civilization always generates shadows beside wealth. Months later, as the voyage nears completion and goods prepare for transfer toward overland networks again, you stand upon the deck at sunset watching flying fish skim briefly across glowing water. The world feels impossibly connected now compared to those first dusty frontier roads outside Chang'an generations earlier. Not peacefully connected, not equally, but undeniably intertwined. Silk once travelled westward mainly through camel caravans crossing deserts one oasis at a time. Now, maritime networks move porcelain, spices, paper, religions, technologies, and people across oceans with growing speed. The ancient overland routes still survive, But change has begun quietly shifting the balance. Empires inland do not fully understand it yet. Perhaps no one does. Below deck, merchants calculate profits beside damp cargo, while sailors sing low rhythmic songs into the warm evening air. The sea stretches endlessly around the ship, darkening slowly beneath the first emerging stars, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the future of global trade waits, already rising with the tide. The horsemen arrive like weather. At first, the stories seem exaggerated, which is often true along trade routes. Travellers describe entire cities surrendering without battle, armies disappearing into smoke and dust, riders crossing impossible distances with terrifying speed. Then the reports multiply. Caravans arriving from the north speak in lowered voices about the Mongols, and gradually the Silk Road begins changing beneath their shadow. The Mongol expansions under Genghis Khan and his successors erupt across Eurasia with astonishing force during the 13th century. Kingdoms collapse, borders dissolve, entire populations flee advancing armies. Fear spreads faster than accurate information, yet alongside destruction comes an unexpected transformation. The roads become unified in ways unseen for centuries. You travel westward again through territories now absorbed into the vast Mongol Empire stretching from China toward Eastern Europe and the Middle East. The scale feels difficult to comprehend even while moving through it. One political authority, countless peoples beneath it. The violence creating this order remains impossible to ignore. Burned settlements still scar certain valleys. Survivors speak quietly about massacres and sieges with expressions gone emotionally flat from repetition. A silk merchant from Samarkand tells you his grandfather survived by hiding beneath corpses after a city assault decades earlier. Then moments later he casually discusses tax rates improving under Mongol administration. History often refuses emotional simplicity. The Mongols themselves appear remarkably pragmatic once conquest stabilizes into governance. They protect trade routes aggressively because commerce strengthens imperial wealth and communication. Caravan travel across huge distances becomes safer in certain periods than it had been under fragmented regional conflicts. Banditry decreases sharply along protected routes. Way stations expand. Messengers cross continents with startling speed. This relative stability later becomes known by historians as the Pax Mongolica, though the phrase risks sounding gentler than reality truly was. Peace enforced through terror remains terror. Still, caravans flourish. You stop at a relay station crowded with travellers from nearly every corner of Eurasia. Chinese officials share meals beside Persian astronomers, Armenian traders, Turkic horsemen, Russian craftsmen, and Venetian merchants attempting desperately to appear worldly. The atmosphere feels almost surreal. A single empire now connects landscapes previously divided by endless political barriers. One evening inside the relay compound, a Mongol administrator named Borchu explains the imperial postal system while drinking fermented mare's milk beside the fire. Fast information controls large territory, he says simply. Relay riders change horses constantly across vast distances, allowing messages to travel with astonishing efficiency for the era. Trade benefits enormously from this infrastructure. So do armies. The distinction remains important. Outside, horses stamp against the cold night while guards patrol the compound walls. Despite increased stability, danger never disappears entirely from Silk Road life. A Persian traveller quietly warns that plague rumours have begun circulating farther west. No one pays enough attention yet. Human beings rarely recognize historical catastrophe while it approaches. The next morning, you join a caravan moving towards Samarkand, one of the great cities flourishing under renewed transcontinental exchange. The roads feel busier than ever before. Silk, porcelain, spices, gemstones, manuscripts, furs, and slaves all move through the imperial networks. So do ideas. Gunpowder technologies spread farther westward. Paper currencies expand under Mongol administration in parts of China. Medical knowledge travels alongside religious debate and astronomical observation. The Silk Road reaches perhaps its most globally interconnected moment, and yet beneath the movement lies exhaustion too. Empires this large strain constantly against their own weight. At Samarkand, blue-tiled architecture rises dazzling beneath dry sunlight while markets overflow with goods from across Eurasia. The city feels wealthy beyond imagination, though scars from earlier conquests remain visible beneath the prosperity. An old bookseller points quietly towards repaired walls near the outer district. Mongols destroyed this quarter once, he says, then rebuilt it richer. Again, that strange duality. Destruction and creation intertwined. Inside crowded tea houses, travellers discuss a Venetian merchant family currently journeying farther east through Mongol territory toward China itself. Some accounts mention a young man named Marco accompanying them. Most listeners seem sceptical. The West invents storytellers faster than merchants, one trader mutters. Perhaps fair, yet the Mongol era truly allows unprecedented long-distance travel for certain individuals protected by imperial networks and diplomatic documents. Knowledge about distant regions begins circulating more widely between civilizations than ever before. Maps improve slowly. So does imagination. One cold evening outside Samarkand, you share campfire space with a Nestorian Christian priest, a Buddhist monk, and a Muslim astronomer travelling the same roads beneath Mongol tolerance policies, allowing multiple religions relative freedom. The scene would have seemed impossible generations earlier. They debate cosmology politely while passing bread between them. Nobody fully agrees. Everyone listens anyway. The Mongols themselves often prioritize loyalty and taxation above religious uniformity. For trade and communication, this flexibility proves enormously effective. Ideas move more freely when fewer authorities attempt suppressing every unfamiliar belief crossing their borders. Still, fear remains everywhere beneath the surface. The memory of conquest lingers in survivors' bodies long after cities rebuild. One night, Borchu tells stories quietly about campaigns across northern China while sharpening arrows beside the firelight. His tone stays calm, matter of fact. People think victory feels glorious. He says, mostly it feels tiring. The honesty unsettles you more than boasting would have. Empires consume ordinary human lives regardless of ideology. Soldiers age, cities burn. Merchants adapt because survival demands adaptation. Weeks later, while travelling westward once more, the caravan stops beside a cemetery filled with recent graves marked hurriedly near a roadside settlement. No battle occurred here, only illness. Travellers speak now with increasing concern about strange sickness spreading along trade routes. Fever, swollen lymph nodes, sudden death in crowded towns and ports. Accounts differ wildly. Some blame poisoned wells, others suspect divine punishment. A physician travelling with the caravan looks deeply troubled. The roads carry everything, he says quietly. You remember those words long afterward. Because the Silk Road's greatest strength has always been connection. Goods, ideas, technologies, religions, and cultures flowing between distant worlds. But connection carries consequences too. Disease moves along the same roads as silk. As night settles across the caravan camp, wind brushes softly through the grasslands while horses breathe clouds into the cold air. Somewhere beyond the darkness, Mongol riders continue crossing enormous distances beneath imperial banners. The world has never felt more connected than it does now, and perhaps never more fragile. The silence arrives gradually. At first, the Silk Road still appears alive enough. Caravans continue crossing deserts. Port cities remain crowded. Markets still overflow with silk, spices, porcelain, and stories from distant worlds. But something underneath has begun weakening. You feel it in abandoned way stations where no fresh horses wait anymore. In oasis towns surviving on memory rather than prosperity. In caravanserais built for hundreds, now sheltering only a handful of weary travellers beside cold fires. Trade routes rarely die dramatically. Usually they thin slowly like rivers during drought. The plague spreads westward and eastward through the connected world with horrifying speed during the 14th century. Historians later debate exact transmission paths and timelines, but the broader truth remains undeniable. Fleas, rats, ships, caravans, crowded cities, military campaigns, and human movement carry devastation across Eurasia. The Silk Road becomes a conduit for catastrophe. You arrive at one trading city to find market squares nearly empty beneath harsh afternoon sunlight. Shops remain shuttered. Doors marked with symbols warning of sickness stand silent along entire streets. The smell reaches you before full understanding does. Smoke from funeral pyres. Vinegar. Decay hidden poorly beneath incense. People move quickly through public spaces now, avoiding unnecessary contact. Travellers receive suspicious glances instead of warm negotiation. Fear alters human behaviour faster than any law. A physician named Fatima works inside a temporary treatment house near the market district. Exhaustion hangs from her shoulders visibly. She has stopped pretending optimism helps. "We cannot outrun this," she says quietly while washing blood from cloth strips in boiling water. Outside, bells ring repeatedly for the dead. No one counts carefully anymore. Trade contracts collapse when merchants die mid-journey. Entire caravans vanish between cities. Ports impose restrictions. Villages barricade roads against strangers. Human connection, once the Silk Road's great strength, now feels terrifying. The roads still carry movement, but increasingly they carry grief. Weeks later, the caravan passes through abandoned settlements where irrigation channels clog with weeds and collapsed roofs bake beneath empty skies. Some communities disappear entirely after disease. Drought, warfare, or shifting trade patterns make survival impossible. The desert reclaims patiently. You remember those earlier ruins near the Taklamakan generations ago? Broken bowls beneath drifting sand, empty walls dissolving into silence. Now the pattern repeats elsewhere. History leaves echoes constantly. Political fragmentation worsens the decline. The Mongol Empire fractures into competing successor states. Regional conflicts disrupt long-distance security once maintained across enormous territories. New maritime trade routes increasingly bypass older overland networks altogether. Ocean commerce now moves goods faster and cheaper in many cases. Empires follow efficiency eventually. In Samarkand, older merchants speak nostalgically about the great caravan years under unified Mongol administration, when travellers crossed continents beneath relative stability. Younger traders listen politely but focus increasingly on maritime opportunities through Indian ocean networks. The future shifts southward toward the sea. One evening inside a fading caravanserai, only 6 travellers share space built for hundreds. Wind whistles softly through damaged shutters, while rain leaks steadily into empty corners of the courtyard. The atmosphere feels haunted. An elderly caravan master named Idris studies the quiet compound with visible sadness. "When I was young," he says, "you could hear 10 languages here before sunset. Now only the rain answers." He describes earlier decades, when silk caravans stretched beyond sight along certain roads, and musicians performed nightly for crowded travellers carrying fortunes between civilizations. "People believed the roads would last forever," he says softly. Human beings always believe their systems permanent while living inside them. Outside, mud gathers across neglected paving stones while one exhausted stable boy brushes the last remaining mule with mechanical patience. Even decline depends upon ordinary labour continuing quietly. The Silk Road does not vanish completely, of course. Trade persists, pilgrims still travel, ideas continue crossing borders. But the immense interconnected world once sustained primarily through overland caravan networks begins fragmenting into something different, less unified, less central, more vulnerable to changing global currents. You journey eastward again through territories increasingly unstable beneath competing rulers, shrinking trade revenue and exhausted populations recovering unevenly from generations of crisis. Certain cities survive through adaptation, others collapse into obscurity. Dunhuang grows quieter. Some frontier forts stand abandoned entirely. Sand drifts across roads once packed with movement, At a remote oasis settlement, you meet a young monk carefully storing manuscripts inside sealed cave chambers to protect them from war, theft, and decay. His hands move gently over scrolls accumulated across centuries, Buddhist texts, administrative records, songs, contracts, fragments of human lives. "We preserve what we can," he says simply. You think suddenly of all the invisible labour sustaining civilization across generations. Scribes copying texts beside dim lamps, merchants carrying ideas unknowingly between cultures, translators wrestling with impossible meanings late into the night. Most of them never imagined history would forget their names. Yet without them, entire worlds disappear. Near the old frontier corridors approaching China, entire stretches of road feel eerily empty now. Watchtowers crumble slowly beneath weather and neglect. Grass grows through cracked stones where caravans once passed continuously. The silence feels physical. One evening, you camp beside the remains of a relay station overlooking dry plains, fading gold beneath sunset. Beck is gone now, dead years earlier after illness caught him during winter travel. Ren disappeared somewhere westward long ago. Tao settled eventually in a city near the coast, teaching music shaped by influences gathered across half the known world. The road scattered everyone eventually. Perhaps that was always inevitable. As darkness settles, distant bells drift faintly through the cooling air from a monastery farther down the valley. The sound feels impossibly fragile against the enormous silence surrounding it, and yet still beautiful. The Silk Road connected civilizations for centuries through ambition, curiosity, greed, faith, survival, and wonder. It carried silk and gunpowder, Buddhism and plague, astronomy and music, loneliness and hope. It changed every culture touching it. Now the old overland networks fade gradually beneath shifting empires and rising oceans of maritime trade. The world moves onward into another age, but traces remain everywhere. In language, in religion, in recipes and melodies, in manuscripts hidden inside desert caves, in cities shaped by strangers who arrived centuries earlier and never fully left. The road itself may quiet. The human connections it created do not. Centuries later, the desert still remembers. You feel it first in the silence. Not empty silence exactly, but the layered quiet of places where countless human voices once passed and vanished. Wind moves across broken walls. Sand slips patiently through abandoned streets. Faded murals stare outward from cave temples where monks once painted by butter lamp late into the night. The Silk Road survives now mostly through fragments, ruins, manuscripts, buried cities rediscovered beneath drifting dunes. You travel once more toward the western deserts beyond Dunhuang, where archaeologists, explorers, monks, treasure hunters, and scholars eventually arrive searching for traces of lost worlds swallowed gradually by time. Some come respectfully, others do not. History attracts both reverence and greed. The road into the desert feels quieter than ever now. Modern borders and changing trade systems transformed the old caravan networks long ago. Yet the landscape itself remains hauntingly familiar. Dry wind against stone, cold stars above empty plains, the smell of dust after rare rain. At the edge of one abandoned settlement, crumbling walls emerge from the sand exactly as they did generations earlier. Only now, people arrive carrying notebooks, cameras, excavation tools, and theories about civilizations erased almost completely from living memory. You walk beside a scholar named Lin Mei studying manuscripts recovered from sealed cave libraries near Dunhuang. Her hands move carefully over fragile pages preserved astonishingly well by the desert climate. Dry places keep secrets, she says softly. The manuscripts contain Buddhist sutras, business contracts, personal letters, military records, songs, tax documents, and private prayers written across centuries in multiple languages. Ordinary life survives unexpectedly through paper. One letter from a homesick soldier complains about terrible frontier food. Another records a merchant arguing over missing camels. Someone copied a child poem carefully onto scrap paper for reasons no historian fully understands. These small human details feel strangely moving. Empires collapse into abstraction eventually. Personal voices do not. Inside the Mogao cave temples near Dunhuang, painted walls still glow faintly beneath careful lighting. Blues, reds, golds, bodhisattvas gazing serenely across centuries of dust and political upheaval. Travellers kneeling in prayer beneath painted heavens long after the original artist disappeared into history. The caves smell faintly of dry earth and old pigment. Time itself seems suspended there. Lin Mei explains how monks sealed thousands of manuscripts inside hidden chambers around the 11th century, possibly to protect them during periods of instability. Historians still debate certain details. No complete agreement survives. That uncertainty feels appropriate somehow. The Silk Road always carried mystery beside knowledge. Outside the caves, modern tourists photograph desert cliffs while buses idle nearby under harsh sunlight. The contrast feels strange at first. Ancient sanctuaries beside plastic water bottles and camera flashes. Then again, the Silk Road was never frozen in one era. Movement defined it from the beginning. You travel farther west through regions where entire oasis kingdoms vanished after rivers shifted course or trade routes moved elsewhere. Archaeological sites emerge half-buried beneath sand like interrupted memories. At one ruined city, wooden doorframes still stand crookedly against the desert sky centuries after the surrounding homes disappeared. A child's shoe rests preserved in dry earth beneath a collapsed wall. The sight catches unexpectedly in your chest. Someone once hurried through these streets believing tomorrow mattered. The desert kept their footprint anyway. At night you camp beneath stars near the ruins while cold wind brushes softly across the dunes. Modern excavation teams sleep nearby inside tents filled with maps, measuring tools, and carefully catalogued artifacts waiting for transport. One archaeologist admits quietly that the work feels emotionally overwhelming sometimes. You stop seeing ruins, she says, you start seeing interrupted lives. That may be the entire story of history. Interrupted lives connected briefly through fragile roads. The next morning, sunlight spreads slowly across the desert while workers uncover fragments of pottery, fabric, and writing from beneath compacted layers of sand. Every object feels intimate. A comb, a broken bowl, a merchant seal, evidence that ordinary people once laughed, worried, argued, traded, prayed, and dreamed here beneath the same sky. The Silk Road was never truly about silk alone. Silk simply became the symbol. The deeper reality was human connection stretching across impossible distance, long before modern technology made communication feel effortless. Caravans crossing deserts, monks translating texts, sailors trusting monsoon winds, families waiting years for returning travellers who sometimes never returned at all. Connection always carried risk. Still, people chose it, again and again. As evening approaches, you climb a ridge overlooking the desert while the ruins below glow amber beneath fading light. Wind moves gently across the sand, carrying no voices now. No camel bells, no bargaining merchants, no frontier soldiers staring westward toward uncertain horizons. And yet somehow the road still feels alive, because its consequences remain everywhere. Paper changed civilization. Gunpowder transformed warfare. Religions crossed continents. Music absorbed foreign rhythms. Cities learned to survive through diversity. Entire cultures became layered from centuries of exchange. Even now, modern nations, cuisines, languages, and ideas still carry fingerprints left by those ancient roots connecting East and West. The Silk Road never truly ended. It simply changed form. Night settles slowly across the desert one final time. Stars emerge sharp above the dunes, while cool air brushes against the weathered stones of lost cities. Somewhere far away, trains move through modern trade corridors. Cargo ships cross oceans carrying goods between continents. Information flashes instantly across invisible networks surrounding the globe. Human beings remain connected, more than ever, yet perhaps the old caravan roads still offer something modern life easily forgets. A reminder that civilizations are not isolated achievements. They are conversations, long, imperfect, beautiful conversations carried by tired people willing to cross difficult ground towards strangers. And tonight, beneath the same stars once guiding merchants, monks, soldiers, and wanderers across the Silk Road, you can almost feel those distant worlds breathing softly together still. In the quiet after long journeys, history often feels less like a list of events and more like a collection of human moments stitched gently together across time. A soldier rereading a letter beside a frontier fire, a monk translating one difficult sentence by candlelight, a child laughing in an oasis market before the desert wind rises again, a merchant staring westward wondering whether the road home still remembers him. The Silk Road carried empires, certainly, but it also carried loneliness, curiosity, exhaustion, music, recipes, prayers, ambitions, and ordinary tenderness between strangers who otherwise would never have met. Perhaps that is why these old roads still linger in the imagination, not because they were perfect, not because history along them was peaceful, but because they revealed something enduring about human beings, even across deserts, mountains, languages, religions, and fear. People continued reaching toward one another anyway, and somewhere tonight, listeners across different cities and countries are doing something strangely similar, gathering quietly beneath separate skies to remember worlds long gone, yet still alive in the stories we carry forward together. So if this journey through the Silk Road stayed with you, perhaps share where you listened from, what moments lingered most in your mind, or which corners of history you would like to wander through next. There are always more roads waiting in the dark. Until then, may your evening feel peaceful, your mind a little lighter, and your dreams filled with the distant lanterns glowing softly beyond the desert horizon.